I'm digging that.
Greetings, one and all, and welcome to another edition of the Breakfast Club Jamboree, or Jamborizzle as it is this week, with my good friend Jack and Michael. Greetings, friends. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
What happened to your camera?
To whose camera?
Paul's camera.
It's a little fuzzy.
Okay.
that might be the bit rate though.
Okay.
I don't know. So, Jack, it's been a while. What have you been keeping yourself busy with lately?
That actually, I built this puppet here in the background, I worked on two puppet films over the last few months. One of them occupied all of my time, and while the building was very fun and challenging, the people I was working with were not very good people to work with. And then the other puppet project,
In terms of not very professional, or were they just dicks?
total dicks. Well, a dick. The director was no fun to work with. Kind of. Anyway, I don't need to get into that right now. The other project was a lot of fun. I worked with director Rob Dark on his film Pip and Squeak Go Viral, and that one was a shorter project. There was very little money involved, and it was way more fun. And it's like the total difference is just the people I was working with, just like how enjoyable it was to be on set, to to get some feedback. There's a lot more positivity on one set than the other, and a hell of a lot less pretension too. So that was great.
Well, that is great. Hey, are you still emanating from the Portland area in Oregon?
I am. That's correct. Yeah.
And has it been going on this whole time, but it's just like off the headlines now, or what?
Yeah. So there's this great photograph that I always reference when I talk about how Portland is seen in the news. And it's this picture, I believe it's from the Occupy protests in about 2010. And it is an overturned garbage can with a little bit of fire coming out of it. And it was photographed near the park blocks here in downtown Portland. And there are about 30 photographers, news photographers, arranged around it in a semicircle, taking photos of this one trash can that's been overturned and the tiny little fire that's inside it. And that picture is the perfect representation of sort of the media approach to talking about Portland and Portland protests, because Portland protests are something that are largely exacerbated by police. Often, if you see the really dramatic imagery, it's because, there are riot cops shooting tear gas everywhere, or there are bloody faces where somebody's been hit in the eye with a canister, or, there's a dramatic, image of cops putting their boots down on somebody in a gutter or something like that.
Normal American protests, basically.
Yeah. And when the cops aren't there, the protests tend to get either completely ignored, or maybe some small garbage fire or something will be blown up out of proportion, and Fox News can talk about how the entire city is burning down. But Portland's a city that has some protests. We've got a crappy mayor. Ted Wheeler is a putz. We've got pretty out of touch people in power generally, and have for a long time. I mean, our previous mayors were Charlie Hale and what's his name, Adam something, Sam Adams, the beer guy, not the beer guy, but sounds like it. The sort of Portland gets in the news for what I feel like are often exaggerated reasons.
Right. But is the people on the ground down there, I mean, are they still pounding the same messages, or what's going on with what's the actual protest movement trying to accomplish?
I from my perspective, it seems to have cooled quite a bit. There's a lot of people who are upset about the rent moratorium, and certainly homelessness is a major problem in Portland and has been for years. And Oh, deep ashtray. I'll get to talking about the heat wave because I was in the middle of puppeteering on set inside a 140-degree box during the heat wave. Part of why that project wasn't as much fun. Um, but the heat wave was bad. A number of people died in their homes or died in tents. It was certainly. Portland hasn't been great at making sure that there were cooling centers. I want to be clear, like libraries open, turned on their air conditioning and stuff like that. But in general, I don't think Portland has put a focus on how to actually solve the homelessness problem or really address climate change, despite being thought of as one of the more progressive cities in the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if you could have three wishes and one of them had to do with homelessness, what would you do with the stroke of your magic wand?
I think it's actually relatively simple. Housing first. We have plenty of hotels in the Portland area that have been failing. Certainly, some totally failed, over the COVID pandemic. Ashland did this. They bought an old motel that had gone out of business, and they turned it into, I think, a 23-room homeless, not shelter, but more like homeless center or path to housing center, and that seems to work. There's a lot of evidence that at least in the short term, if you just put people in housing first and then you start taking care of drug problems or various addiction or mental illness. I mean, just get people off the street first.
Sure.
Now, a lot of homeless people don't want to get off the street. They want to just be able to set up a tent wherever they want and be left alone. And that in some ways has become a meme among the people who think that homelessness can't be solved, because they just point to homeless people who say they don't want to be housed through these public means, and they go, oh well, these people just don't want to, they don't want to.
How much of that don't want to be housed attitude probably emanates, in your opinion, from not trusting the system?
That's exactly what it is that it's a matter of faith, really. It's a matter of, and obviously I don't mean it in a religious sense, but it's a matter of faith in a system will be there, and that there is an actual ladder. Because it's one thing to hand somebody a chunk of 2x4 and tell them this is the bottom rung of the ladder, but it's not attached to anything.
Right.
No way to climb up anywhere beyond that. And that's a lot of the problem with the structure of housing first at the moment. I think housing first is a good idea and it needs to be done. We've got tons of empty dwellings around that could start that process. But we also have to start putting in some long-term structures that give people the sense that actually there is a second rung after the first one. And
Sure.
there is ultimately a path out of this. Because what we're doing now is we're blaming people for having, being kicked off of the ladder in the first place, or fallen down. We're deciding that whatever they've done, it's, their fault, they're there. And now that they're there, they're choosing to stay there. And there's very little infrastructure for anything beyond, okay, we'll stop beating them in the head every few weeks, with police purges. We'll make a few public toilets available around the city. But we haven't really done anything that says, actually, we want to see you in some long-term survivable situation, and we'll actually work to make that happen. And you can trust that we will do that. We'll continue to do it. And none of these none of the folks who are on the street now know anyone who's, succeeded out of this situation. They know plenty of people who have fallen out of the middle class or fallen out of poverty into homelessness, but there's not a lot of evidence for people, at least at the local level, of getting back out of that situation and having a better situation on the other end.
Yeah, and I'm not even really sure how you. Homelessness is one of my pet peeves, as you know, and it's just. I saw an article on Twitter the other day that says homelessness has gone up by at minimum 100,000 people during the pandemic. That's before all these evictions start kicking in. And frankly, if it's a government estimate, it's probably underestimated anyway. So, I wouldn't like to just pluck a number out of the air, but I'm just saying, if they're saying 600,000, it was 500,000 last summer. So, and as far as I'm aware, isn't there about like 200 or 250,000 homeless just in Los Angeles or the greater Los Angeles area alone? So
it's something like that.
That's
yeah.
Like half the homeless people in the country then, or nearly half,
Yeah, well, the latest estimate I heard is we're closing in on, somewhere close to 1 million total homeless in the country. I don't know where that estimate falls in, whether that's a conservative or an overly exaggerated estimate. But if we're talking about every state, every city's problem, of course, it is very difficult to count the homeless. Every city knows this, that it's very challenging to track where everybody is. There is a lot of transience and migration. Here on the I-5 corridor, we call it the hippie highway. There's people from Los Angeles to Sacramento, San Francisco, Eugene, and Portland and Seattle, who are all kind of moving up and down that highway. It used to be through hitchhiking. Hitchhiking's not as much of a thing, but there's people who do train riding and stuff like that to get up and down this corridor. And so having some definitive number of how many people there are is quite difficult. Another thing is...
Just an aside real quick before you do,
Yeah.
Hold that thought, but hands up. Has everybody here hitchhiked? I've hitchhiked. Have you hitchhiked, guys? Down below? No? Wow. Okay, go ahead, Jack. I was just curious. What was your thought?
So the other thing is that a lot of people who are homeless are afraid of things that they've done while homeless, sort of like coming back to them. Often that's just like, I might owe a whole bunch of taxes. I haven't paid taxes the whole time I've been, in this situation. People accrue tons and tons of parking tickets for living in their vehicles. People accrue, arrest warrants for, public exposure for going to the bathroom in public or on a sidewalk. Public indecency charges for, various problems with their clothing. And all that stuff racks up. And there is a genuine fear for a lot of people that if I get back into the system, if I'm going back on the grid, then I have to address all those things. And all those things, of course, come with a large amount of interest. And, it's very easy for somebody to have a parking ticket on a vehicle because the battery didn't work or they couldn't move it or whatever. And then that parking ticket doubles in 30 days and doubles again in 60 days. And before they know it, they have a $900 parking ticket that in Oregon, they also take away your driver's license if you have unpaid parking tickets. So that means there's a lot of people who couldn't move their vehicles for poverty reasons and lost their license. So if they are driving, they're driving illegally. If they're stopped, then they're worried about going to jail. If they've been to jail, several things happen. Often they lose all their stuff. Often they lose connection because even though cell phones are becoming more prevalent among the homeless in the US, it's like not everybody has one, obviously. And people are often getting prepaid cell phones that they have for a couple of years or something. They're constantly changing numbers. So keeping track of, the core group of people that they see as sort of a solidarity group or a friend group that helps them that gets lost, often if they go to jail. Often if they go to jail, the state will do whatever it can to ship them off somewhere else. Well, you originally came from Indiana. Let's just put you on an Amtrak back to Indiana and let the cops there deal with you.
Wow.
And so there's the biggest problem with homelessness is the amorphousness of the problem. Like, there's no concrete numbers, there's no concrete understanding of who is who, there's no way of tracking everybody.
Well, in some parts of the country, it's straight up illegal to be homeless.
Oh yeah, Los Angeles it is. When I was homeless in the mid 90s in LA, I took it upon myself to go read the LAMC municipal code in there was a free law library in Hollywood, and I would go hang out there. And by the letter of the law, everything you do as a homeless person in Los Angeles is illegal.
Wow.
And it's very possible, if a cop wants to be real nasty, to just write you up, 5 or 10 different tickets, often for huge amounts. I mean, you can end up owing $10,000 for having been homeless in Los Angeles.
Wow.
In tickets. And those, some of them have statutes of limitations, but they don't necessarily go away. They still stay in your records, and that will make it difficult for you to get a job. It'll make it difficult for you to apply for apartments. There's all kinds of stuff. So not only are you in a bad situation being homeless, but you're also put in that situation more or less permanently, because we really don't want to solve this problem. This is a very,
No, the fact that the bottom rung or the rung below the rungless rung is a choice. It's a combination of social choices that have been made by successive generations, and it really makes me angry that we've chosen the bottom of our society to be people who have to live on the street and are at all kinds of peril for various different reasons, just from getting beat up by punks who think there's no consequence for beating up a homeless person. That kind of thing happens all the time in the UK. I'm sure it happens here as well.
Yeah.
Well,
in the 90s, we had that epidemic of people setting homeless people on fire. This was in the mid to late 90s, 96, 97. I remember people would douse a sleeping person in gasoline and light their sleeping bag on fire with them in it. That was became an epidemic across the country. You saw,
I mean, pardon me for being master of the obvious, but that's some fucked up shit, man. I mean, what kind of fucking evil person do you have to be to want to set another human being who you've never done you any wrong, who just happens to be there, offending your sense of order in the universe, I guess? I mean, What the fuck?
Well, I think in some ways it's just part of the belief structure of the United States, where we dislike the poor pretty intensely. Hi, Raven. How's it going?
So I'd like to talk about what Jack said about the programs for sending people back to where they came from. There is such a program in Denver. It's called the Homeward Bound program. It's very hard to get people referral to because, it needs funding. Once it gets funding, we all hear about it. And, I have sent people home to where they came from because they were just constantly going to our detox, and I got them a referral to the program. They went. It's not like they don't have a choice to leave, but there's funding to get someone a bus ticket to go back to where they came from. And I've seen people succeed when they have their family as support around them. There are people who get stuck in Denver because of their flight not connecting and them not having enough money to change it. And that's what made them be homeless, is just for having an international airport.
I never thought of that.
But the Green Machine said that couch servers probably aren't counted. In Colorado, the system for counting homeless people, they have a point in time check where they actually go out and count physically all the homeless people, but they also have the HMIS system where anyone who has a service that deals with the homeless, they're part of the system. When they log whenever somebody comes in their door in the system, and let's say somebody's stays one night at a homeless shelter and realizes that they left their ID at the detox will actually see this message pop up saying, hey, he forgot his ID. And, we might actually be able to help out with that. There's a network to be able to talk between different places. Couch surfers would be counted as homeless people if they ever appeared somebody for a service, like say went to a food bank, and then they put down that they did not have a proper place to stay. If they filled out forms that way, they would be counted. But a lot of couch surfers never engage for services, and they don't consider themselves homeless because they have friends they can couch surf with. Right. Those don't get counted because they don't consider themselves homeless.
I've couch surfed a number of times, and I didn't consider myself homeless at the time. So I considered myself rootless and pathetic, but not homeless. Raven Kazoom, speak.
Meow, ruff.
That's what I was going to do. Kiz says the ultimate oppressed demographic in the United States are the homeless. And I'm sorry for the music in the background. Toddlers. Anyway, that's true. Because not only, is there basically hatred or disdain shown to the homeless from just everyday people, it's also expensive to be homeless, and it's expensive to be poor. There's systemic oppression. There's costs, excessive or extra costs associated with being homeless. Our country's fucked up.
Well, it takes money to save money if you want to shop at Costco.
Yeah.
To be able to afford the membership first, you have to be able to store the savings of buying in bulk. So it costs more to be poor.
Yeah, just not having a refrigerator is a big part of it. Particularly during the heat wave, there were people who were trying to get groceries out to people because, of course, it's well known that as soon as the heat comes, it became like even an ice chest or cooler or something like that is not going to do it, and people are dealing with spoiled food very quickly in that situation. And of course, a lot of people, the consequences of that are food poisoning and various other things, which people have died from that as well.
Sure. What's the hottest it got during the heat wave this summer?
So we had two heat waves. The first heat wave was the worst. That one was, I forget when it was, back in July, but that's when we broke a record. We didn't just break a record. We got to 116 degrees on the hottest day, and our previous record was 108. So we broke the record by 8 degrees, which is not, it's sort of a joke to call that record breaking when it's, record annihilating.
Sure. The hottest day I've ever experienced is when I lived in Northern California in the 80s, and it was like 109. And that is just beyond torture, especially if you don't have air conditioning. So I can't even comprehend what 116 is like. That's a sauna, but you're outdoors, So,
yeah. Particularly with the humidity and it was just completely baking. I was lucky I was working in here, which is more or less a concrete building, so it worked more or less as a heat sink. And we didn't have air conditioning, but we had fans and stuff, and it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But as soon as you step outside the door, you really can't even breathe. It's just it's like trying to smoke yogurt or something. I don't know.
Thankfully it wasn't a super humid heat, but still, even here, we went up to about 109 or something like that. And yeah, I was surprised the computers made it through that, and there was only one air conditioner that was in my mother's room, and yeah.
Yeah, I always lived in the Pacific Northwest when I lived in America before I moved away, and so you can get some humidity sometimes, but it's never really been like terrible. And then I moved to the UK, obviously, and when I lived in London and was a scaffolder. Yeah, some of those days, I mean, the humidity, it'll only be like in our language about 85 or 86 degrees, which is like a nice summer's evening in Santa Rosa, California, where I come from.
Right.
So you don't really think too much about it. But it's sweltering in London when it's that hot, sweltering. And then I moved back to America, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's pretty dry here in Colorado. So it's not so bad no matter how hot it gets. But when I go to St. Louis, Jesus Christ, last month when I had the COVID, right before I got sick, it was like 90 degrees, which doesn't sound terrible, but it was like 90% humidity. So you walk out, it's just like smash, it's on you. And it's just, yeah, it's not comfortable. I'm not sure if I could cope living there all summer long like that, because it's just the humidity is intense, man.
It's like being in a giant steam room.
It is like it. Yeah. You can't make it from the front of your house to the car without needing a shower.
Yeah.
So guys, let's talk about the amazing fail today. You all know what I'm talking about.
Oh, the people that didn't show up at the Capitol?
Oh, right. I only barely saw that on Twitter, so I'm actually not super up to date on how that's going. I did see a hilarious video of the guy who was putting it on, who was like, hey, come help us pay for our $89,000 dance floor that protects the lawn or whatever. And somehow I guess it sounds like he's not going to make his $89,000 deposit back.
Right. I would like to discuss this comment from the Green Machine. Why show up if the cops are ready for you? That's what it boils down to, doesn't it? That's what it boils down to. And it makes me, I mean, I don't want to diverge just onto January 6th right off the bat or anything, but I will say this. When I personally was watching January 6th happen live, I kept on saying, someone inside has told someone to stand down or to stand something, because they advanced way too soon, way too fast over all the barriers. It wasn't just that there weren't enough cops. The cops were being a little bit too acquiescent, shall I say, at the beginning, before the actual riot started, just when they're approaching and encroaching. And I kept on saying to my gal, I'm like, someone's been given orders to let this happen. What's going on? How can they get so close? Blah, 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 blah. And then it all went wrong. But now, obviously, Trump isn't in office, and therefore no one's giving the order for the cops to stand by. So, and I think there might have been more police present today than protesters. I'm not 100% sure how many cops were there. But I take it there were protests between sort of 350 and 500 people.
So I knew that this was going to be a nothing burger. I mean, I don't. For weeks now, they've been making a big deal about it, and as it got closer, it was like more and more of a, oh my God, this thing is going to happen. I never brought it up or talked with anyone about it because just didn't think it would amount to anything. The fire is gone. The passion has been burned out. We are where we are. And I think most people that were involved in the first one, and the people who may have wanted to be involved in this one, are smart enough to look and see, yeah, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, but here's the thing. I mean, Trump wants to sort of shout from the sidelines in the safety of his, mansion. Hey, yeah, this is a great thing, blah, blah, blah. But he doesn't want to show up and speak there. And one of the reasons January 6th happened in the first place is because Trump was going to speak there. And that's one of the main reasons that drew people to Washington. It wasn't just a charge in the Capitol. It's because they're going to go see their savior or their hero or whatever you want to call him.
Well, did you see Trump recently, over the past couple of days, he started defending the just everyone who's been persecuted, who was at the Capitol, inside the Capitol, and he's defending them as if they're, and it's just like, yeah, and you're trying to claim that you're not have no responsibility for what happened because of what, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Anyway.
How can you have it both ways, though, right? I mean, how can you say, oh, this wasn't my fault, and then say, hey, these guys were doing the right thing. I'm all for it.
You know, maybe we're overlooking the fact that maybe we're old, all of us, and we don't really understand how the young kids they're on to the next big thing like horse paste. You know, QAnon is like so yesterday.
I hope so. Is it really yesterday? Has that shit actually gone away, or does it just not get the traction because there's no election coming up right now?
No, I think it's morphed. It's very clear that it's still around, but kicking it off of large social media platforms caused it to mutate. There's a lot of smaller groups. There's some Canadian woman who's claiming to be the new Queen of Canada, who has a large QAnon following base, and they're using different words. They're sort of they have definitely fragmented.
Well, you know it's completely sold out when there's QAnon plus. Anyway.
Yeah.
So wait. So is this woman aware that there's already a Queen of Canada?
Oh no, that queen is part of the pedophile cabal or whatever, and there's been
She's a lizard person.
a silent coup that has installed her as queen, and she's the thing that is interesting about this, and one of the reasons, and I don't even remember this woman's name off the top of my head. Sorry, I don't have the details in front of me about the new Queen of Canada. But her claims are that today I presided over the execution of 50,000 traitors or whatever, and those are the things that her base likes, and it's part of why she's attracting a following. Obviously, nobody can prove that there are 50,000 people who were just executed in Canada. Any more than people can prove all the really ridiculous and wild claims about child trafficking.
Sure.
So people just like the idea that the people they hate are being executed in some public square somewhere,
because that's just a great thing to contemplate, right? I mean, don't get it. I don't get it.
That is the central thing that they want. Particularly after they waited for the storm, there were, the actual Q posts had tons and tons of different specific identifiable dates when the storm would come, or when various people would be indicted.
Well, I thought today was supposed to be one of those dates, and the storm, it drizzled, man. I mean, and there was supposed to be like different protests in various capitals around the country. Michael, are you aware of anything that happened in Denver today? Because I know there was supposed to be something, but I don't know what happened.
I was working and didn't happen to look out the window, but driving around a little bit, I didn't see anything.
Right, fair play. Anybody else see or hear anything local happening?
I can draw a parallel to the oncoming storm feeling that QAnon had within it, in that a lot of that I see in the stonk market, where they think that in just next week, that's when the squeeze is going to happen. There's this storm of it's going to the moon, and it's always like kick the can down the road. If it doesn't happen that next week, then there's a prophecy for the next week and the next week, and it just never seems to pan out. And I've seen that in the cryptocurrency world as well, where they have a prediction of where the prices should be, and when it doesn't pan out that way, they just make a new prediction.
Yeah.
And, there is some overlap between the QAnon followers and the Wall Street Bets group.
Well, there's also the people like Harold Camping, who made all his end of the world predictions that never came true. there's a whole long line of people who make predictions about big events that are coming, and either those people sort of fade away a little bit and somebody else takes their spot and has a new prediction, or they just keep making new predictions every few years and they're always wrong and they always get giant followers and people always sell all their stuff and move or get in an RV or whatever, and it never pans out, and it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, there's a part of human nature that will, or for a small subset of people who will continue to believe regardless of how many times it doesn't happen.
Here's the thing. There seems to be, I mean, there's always been a tendency for some people to believe some conspiracy theories, but right now there seems to be a genuine movement. And I personally am very suspicious about cyber warfare, but that's a separate part of the conversation. My whole thing is where does this end? How far does this go before collectively America comes to its senses? What's it going to take? Do we need to be invaded or what? I mean, what's going to happen before we finally go, hey, we're all in a shit together and actually knock it the fuck off?
I'm not sure there is an end. I mean, from my perspective, I see us hurtling toward a really bad climate catastrophe. We're certainly, going to deal with COVID for another year or so. It seems like maybe more, maybe particularly if we get more mutations.
Well, COVID's going to be endemic. It's that simple. It's just at what level it percolates at is the only real question at this point. How many? I mean, I hate to echo Joe Biden almost directly, but what's it going to take for people to wake up? So what we've had, hundreds of thousands of people dead, hospitals full, people who get a car wreck or a heart attack can't get into the hospital and they die of their illness or injury because the COVID beds have filled up the hospitals. I mean, what will wake people up?
I don't know, because we're long past any point I thought people might wake up.
Well, what do you think? What do you think is going to occur out of the FDA just kind of turned down the boosters, and there was thought that for a while that maybe every 6 months we're all going to just get boosters and it'll be similar to having flu shots or something like that, maybe, but with them turning that down, I mean, it just that really threw me off when they turned that down. I mean, what do you think is going to come out of that?
Yeah, my guess is because at least with certain vaccines, I know I got the Pfizer vaccine, and my understanding is in certain circumstances, the Pfizer vaccine is down to 39% effective against Delta variant. So I think that there's a recognition that the virus is mutating faster than the vaccines are, and I'm not sure that if you're doing a booster, is it actually going to be any more effective? And I don't know any of the science behind this stuff, so I'm sort of letting other people make that argument or call. But it seems to me, if I'm in the position where I'm at the CDC and I'm trying to figure out how we actually get this thing under control, we put a lot of faith in vaccines doing it, and that's not really been working. The thing that actually does it is lowering transmission, social distancing, and masks. If anything, the vaccines have sort of given people permission to, mingle in large groups again. There's a lot more transmission, especially if the Delta virus variant really is capable of transmitting through people who have had a vaccine, then vaccines just might not ultimately be that effective.
Yeah, a couple of months ago, when you've been away for a while, a couple of months ago, Michael went to a baseball game here in Denver and saw not a single mask. And it's how many people? 60,000, Michael?
Yeah.
roundabout.
I watched a bit of that. Yeah.
Right. And people have been wondering, hey, why is it so much worse this year than last year? Well, last year we didn't have the sports going on. We didn't have concerts going on. I mean, I know Sturgis did happen last year as well as this year. But I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that weren't happening last year that are happening this year. And to me, so it's not even surprising. It's just simple math that you're going to have more transmission this year because people's behavior is nowhere near as austere as it was last year.
Right.
It's something that was going through my head. There's people make fun of some of the remedies that people are trying to take with good reason. They say, oh, horse medication. But there's one thing that's a little different is monoclonal antibodies, and this is for people that are able to afford it.
Right.
That seems to have been working pretty well, and it's interesting that it's not being talked about more. Everyone keeps focusing on the ivermectin instead. It's oh terrible, but why not? What has anyone studied much about the monoclonal antibodies?
I know a little bit about it because my gal was looking into it when I had the COVID, but I don't know what you. I think you actually have to be obviously hospitalized to even get that treatment. So, getting into the hospital, I don't know how many different hurdles you might have to go through for that. But this is just a slight detour based on what you just said, Kazum. But did you guys hear that Laura Loomer has an aggressive bout of COVID right now?
Yeah, that's been all over, particularly like her two tweets. The one tweet saying, I wish I did get COVID so I could show people, what babies they are. And then her tweet talking about the experience of having COVID. Obviously, I don't wish her any ill. I do think it's sort of an object lesson. It's something where there's a lot of people who made sort of, big macho talk about how easily they do if they got COVID, who then got COVID and have either died or, have experienced it pretty rough. And I wish there was some self-awareness, but I don't see much self-awareness coming from the crowd who was like, yeah, I helped promote the fact that people not get the vaccine or not, social distance, or I was an anti-masker. And there isn't a lot of, I guess I see people making reference, you're pointing down to Raven. I see people making reference about getting, a bad case of COVID, and they want, some empathy from their followers. Like, I'm really suffering here, and I understand that. But there isn't a lot of self-awareness or self-reflection of like, yeah, I, tried to make sure that none of my followers got, the vaccine or wore masks either.
So for monoclonal antibodies, you have to be sick. But if you're in the hospital, if you're being hospitalized, it's too late for monoclonal antibodies.
Oh, right.
The idea is to get that treatment before you're so sick that you need to be hospitalized. So my sister recently, a few weeks ago, got over COVID, and she was really, really sick until she got the antibodies. My father, who was in the hospital, it was too late for him to get them, and that's why they didn't do that with him. And as far as I know, most places that I've seen, and from what I've heard on the media, is monoclonal antibody treatment is being pushed and often covered by the government. It's kind of like the vaccines, where it's just like, just go and get it. If you're sick, just get it. It's covered. So cost isn't a thing. And also, I've heard lots and lots about the monoclonal antibodies. I mean, it's something they talk about on the media that I watch all the time, telling people that this is an option. Don't do horse dewormer, which, by the way, is a false way to describe ivermectin. I mean, it's it's an actual medication for people.
It's a pesticide.
It's been used since 1988, I think.
Yeah, and it actually won a Nobel Prize. So I mean, it's serious medicine. It's real medicine. It's just that people are taking what they tend to have, which is horse dewormer, unfortunately. It's kind of like the people that were taking the hydrochloroquine, who were dying from that because they were taking the version that was used to clean fish tanks. I'm back.
So, I actually have a friend that took the horse paste version, and he followed a recipe of how to dose it for humans that he found online, and he is now singing the praises of it. He's got a TikTok account where he's made a bunch of videos, and he was a very close friend of mine during the Occupy movement, and he swears up and down by it that he had a really bad case of COVID, was following him for 2 weeks, and then he took it and he felt better.
Friends, I remember back in the early days of my YouTube experience when we were lecturing religious fanatics about the dangers of believing things that were clearly false or at least couldn't be proven. And this is that on steroids. I mean, all this stuff going on right now. I mean, religious deprogramming at least has a chance because a lot of people grow up resenting their religion, even though they try to buy into it, but they know something's not quite right. And those are the people you might talk out, or at least give them enough food to think about it. They'll find their own way out. But I honestly don't know how you deprogram idiots when it comes to these conspiracies about COVID. I mean,
one of the biggest problems is that people are no longer trusting mainstream media.
Right.
There's people that just flat out, they're like, well, you guys were wrong about these things here and you never fessed up to it and apologized over it. So we don't trust you at all anymore. So people just gravitate towards all these alternative media that some of the worst of them, I mean, as long as they can make it themselves look as they have enough pizzazz in the way that it's produced, especially if it's video content, that people will gravitate towards those, thinking that they're I don't know, they'll think it's valid just because of it. And some of the worst of if you've looked on some of these alternative video sharing sites, some of them are pretty slick in their production.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that I've seen, Kizum, is often it's not about they're gravitating to this, like the news source, for any reason other than this news source is telling them what they want to hear. They're not looking for news. They're not looking for information. They're looking for somebody to stroke their dicks and to tell them that they're good little boys and that there's nothing they did that's wrong and that the big bad government is hurting them. That's what they want to hear, and that's what they're being told, often by blondes with big tits. So I mean, it makes them very happy. It's not so much that they were like lied to by like other forms of media. It's that they were told they were lied to by other forms of media, and they just went with it because it's easier.
The last lie that I saw from media about ivermectin was them touting that there were a bunch of calls to poison control about ivermectin, and then letting people assume that that's because people are getting poisoned by ivermectin. But you can call just to get the information to see if it's poison.
Yeah.
And so those calls are people who were trying to get the dosage right.
Yeah, and there were also there was a Rolling Stone, which not the first time Rolling Stone has gotten things wrong, had some statement or headline about how there were more people in the hospital due to being poisoned by ivermectin than there were COVID patients or something along those lines. And it was just like ridiculous article, clickbait headline.
So, of course. So now, I mean, in all fairness, I don't know anyone. And wait, I don't know anybody who runs to Rolling Stone for their news. So it's
yeah, but it's still it kind of brings that up. People don't trust it. I have my own ivermectin story. It's not like groundbreaking or anything, but years ago when I first got to Portland, I was homeless. I was couch surfing in anarchist household called Monroe House in Portland, 2001-ish. And there was a scabies scare, and everybody had to take ivermectin in order to deal with it. Now, this is the paste that you put on the insides of your wrist and your neck and the back of your knees and inside of elbows, armpits, those kind of places. But like we were warned repeatedly by a lot of other people, don't take too many doses. Like you want to try and, get the scabies situation controlled in one dose if you can help it, because it is poisonous and it does build up in your body or something like that. And there was this one guy who he went by the security culture name Membrane. I don't actually know what his real name was, but he got very paranoid about scabies. He took multiple doses of ivermectin, topically on his skin, shaved his head, a bunch of other things. Now, I have no idea if there were other, comorbid disorders. It might have been schizophrenia. He might have had other issues going on. But, I do know somebody who took a lot of ivermectin and then was never the same again. I've seen him on a couple of occasions where he's still pretty out there, and again, that's just one data point, but it did make me kind of concerned about taking ivermectin just in general as a medicine.
Leading up to this fad on TikTok, there was a different fad about Paragard, and it wasn't for COVID treatment. It was just a fad of people posting videos of their poop and like how they had pooped out worms, and saying, just go to the Amazon.com listing for Paragard and see all the pictures that people post. You have parasites. You need to treat yourself once a month for parasites. And it was just a whole bunch of people pooping out worms and saying, I didn't even think I'd have worms, but I tried it and I found out I had worms. And some of the pictures might actually be intestinal lining instead of the actual Paragard, but gross pictures, right?
Yeah.
It was a big fad. Paragard had this giant boost in sales. And so people were, trying different things for different ailments. And that I find that happened right before ivermectin took off.
Well, I guess it's not terribly surprising. Looks like Paul was asking about Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend's mailman's dog's owner's balls.
Yeah.
Whatever the line of
So I think it's funny how so many people on the right are suddenly coming to jump to Nicki Minaj's defense, and it's just like you would never ever defend her in any other time than this.
Oh yeah.
And then they're not even paying attention to what she actually said as to why she's against the vaccine.
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. The Nicki Minaj situation. Obviously, there's plenty of other context that, whether through her music or, wearing risky dresses at the VMAs or whatever else, that conservatives have just, lost their shit over. But, today she's saying something slightly related to something they believe.
Yeah. And she's the time that was wasted in hunting down this person that doesn't exist. Or the fact that, she put that disinformation out to millions of people who follow her on social media. It's a shame.
There was even some sort of little miniature gathering protest of, I don't know, maybe 20 people that were protesting in front of the CDC or something. Stupid.
What are they protesting?
They're protesting because they agree with Nicki Minaj. That was their whole thing. So they didn't even know exactly what they're protesting, other than, oh, we're protesting the vaccine. Well, okay.
Okay.
Wait a second. Kazoom, did you get the vaccine?
Yes, absolutely.
Would you say that your balls are pretty swole?
No.
Because I got the vaccine, and I got some, hot swinging lunch meat myself. Jack,
I saw no difference.
Jack, did you have a bad case of swollen, sweaty balls?
The only I did, but that was only because of the heat wave.
Okay.
That's unrelated to the Pfizer vaccine, as far as I know.
Paul, how are your balls doing?
Pendulous.
Just like they've always been.
Well, there's a lot of metal down there.
Okay.
He's also getting older, and that happens.
Yeah. We all are. I defy anybody not to.
Oh, I don't know. I disagree.
Hmm.
No, I heard a Norm Macdonald joke to that effect. Where David Letterman said, nobody can escape it or outrun it. And Norm was like, "Oh, I was hoping you could."
He had a bad joke about cancer too.
Oh yeah.
Nobody ever loses the battle against cancer. It's more of a draw.
It's a draw because, as far as I know, the cancer dies too. I call that a draw. That's pretty good.
Hang on a second.
Please hold.
Well, I'll talk about my puppet experience recently. Because I had two different puppet projects back to back. I was talking with Paul about this before the show started, and just a little bit at the beginning. But I had one really big, long, like 4.5 month long project, building a very elaborate sort of 80s sword and sorcery style, silicone puppet with cable driven eyeballs and all the whole business. Very elaborate, tremendously difficult to build, required just like every skill in the toolbox. Fun from a challenge perspective, but like it's amazing how just one person, sort of the director, who really doesn't appreciate how much work goes into it, can say just like very minor things that just ruin an entire project.
Wow.
And then I work on another project right after it where I'm making very, cheap, cheesy styrofoam puppets that are made out of, 99-cent store supplies, using hot glue and tape and everything else. And it's very sort of skinnier teeth, where I'm there on a 5-day shoot and I've got a table and somebody says, "We need a backpack for these characters. Can you build it?" And I've got to build it in 2 hours before the shot is ready and stuff like that.
So you're like the James Bond of puppeteers, right?
In a way, yeah.
They give you a mission and you've got, your license to thrill with your puppets.
Yeah. I had to take an old CD carousel and turn it into this like little puppet band with 6 automated puppets on it, and little WPA style animation where they each had like musical instruments that were just very suggested out of beads and wire. But the tremendous difference between them was simply in how much fun it was to work with the people, how happy they were to have me there, how much they liked the work in general. Just the environment and spirit of the whole thing was totally different. And it made me think about like how damn cheap I am. Really, like all you have to do is tell me, "I love it, the work's going great," and I am happy as a clam. And then like I can put some of my best work I've ever done. Certainly high level work like I would have done on Disney or Cirque du Soleil projects back in the day, to a guy who's like, well, I think I paid too much, and it's like enough to completely ruin it. And I think it was just a funny high contrast to do those two projects back to back during one of the busiest seasons of my life.
So, Kazoom, are you vaping?
Dry vaporing, yeah, it's where you have the it heats it up just to the point where it turns into a vapor and doesn't actually combust, and it works out really well. So,
Oh, I didn't see you take a drag or anything off of anything. All I saw was smoke surrounding you, and I was just like, I was going to interrupt Jack and say, Kazoom, your house is on fire. But then I saw it, and I was like, oh, this is fine.
Jack, can we ask about the zombie gremlin on a stick behind you?
Yeah, that's one of the puppets I built. That was for the big sort of 80s style sword and sorcery picture that I just worked on. And that director is the one who was just a monumental dick, or potentially a sociopath or something. Just one of the people I've had the least fun working for, and still I think did some of my best work, but not an ultimately fun project. Of course, I was also puppeteering that gremlin on a stick from inside a box that was basically a plywood coffin covered in 2 inches of foam. And since it was 100-degree day, 98-degree day, there was sort of this gradient of temperatures where at the bottom it was 100 degrees, and then you climbed inside the puppet, it was 120, and then 140 up where my head was.
Wow.
So I'm like puppeteering inside there, trying to give the guy the best shots that I can. And in the time it took to drink a bottle of water, I would sweat that much out like instantly. It was tremendously difficult, but still I'm pretty proud of the work, even though for the most part I had to cut a lot of corners to make the low budget.
Joe, welcome to the show. What we'd like to know, Joe, is do you have sizable testicles?
Depends on who you ask, I suppose. Depends on what you're used to.
Were you vaccinated?
I was vaccinated.
Did you notice any change in the size of your testicles?
They did not change in any dimension that I've been able to notice.
I just want to stress to viewers, this is all anecdotal.
Yeah, we have
not a
no
scientific poll.
testicle data. No,
I mean,
no.
People have often told me I've got a lot of balls, so
Okay.
Statistical.
Yeah, that's right. There's no statistical model for this experiment.
So how's everybody tonight?
I'm just dandy. Thank you.
Yeah,
I am
pretty
just
good.
south of Cleveland.
Oh, yeah. You have a new background. Are you
Yeah,
in
yeah.
a hotel or?
I am. And
Well, thanks for joining us despite being on the road, man.
yeah, actually, to show you how much I love you.
Haircut.
Yeah. Well, and to show you how much I love you, people, I left my camera at home, so I actually went to Best Buy and bought a new webcam.
Wow. Yeah, that is huge. Hey, listen, we sort of got off the topic, but I mean, like, now that Joe's here, I want to ask you, Joe, about the great fizzle that was this afternoon's protest rally. I mean, in DC, and do you think the fizzle is indicative of the movement? Isn't so much of a movement as it's a squirm, you know?
I do. I was thinking that because I didn't even notice. I didn't even find out until recently. I happened to. I've been driving, so I wasn't really glued to the news. And I just came from dinner. While I was at dinner, I went and I saw that it was a total fizzle, and I thought, oh, good, because I was legit worried that there was going to be violence and all sorts of bad things were going to happen. And the fact that very few people showed up, despite all the chatter to the contrary. I think that it's starting to lose steam. I think that you can only stay legitimately mad for so long,
See, like in a group of very like-minded people on the internet, I say a lot of things also that aren't true.
Right.
Right. So I mean, yeah, sure, there's lots of internet chatter, but these guys are home. They're playing with their dogs.
Really?
Yeah, and the ones that have kids are getting hundreds of dollars every month now from Joe Biden.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of steam, you're very close to Cleveland, and I just want you to know that tomorrow you might run into some depressed people because it's game day.
Ah, okay. Well,
You said sports ball, and
Yes.
everybody kind of wondered what the
Well, I
heck.
had to warn him because there's no other way he's going to know. He doesn't.
I don't know. I heard Cleveland and I heard steam, and I'm like, what? Where are you
Yeah,
going?
I'm like, is there a Motown reference? Like, where's the?
And I heard Steam, and all I could think of was a gaming place
Platform.
where yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I am partway through my trip. I am heading to Chicago. Next weekend is the Women of Color Beyond Belief convention. Even though it's focused on women's issues and particularly women's of color's issue within atheism and in general, but everyone's invited. It's open to everyone. So that starts on Friday, and so I decided to kind of do what I did back in 2019. I'm doing a walkabout. So rather than just go someplace and then come back, I figured, hey, there's a whole bunch of people I know along the route, and I will go see a bunch of friends and family and make a thing of it. So I'll be coming back. I'll be returning home on the 2nd. So I got 2 more weeks to go.
Hey, I'm right in thinking, aren't I, that Cleveland's baseball team changed their name? But
Yes.
Am I right also in thinking that the Washington, DC football team still hasn't come down with a name, or have they figured something out and I just haven't read about it? Because I can't.
They are only as Washington right now. They're just Washington.
Yeah, so the Indians they're still currently the Indians, but they will be called the Guardians starting next year.
Right. But what about Washington's football team? I thought they were changing their name, but I didn't know what they changed it to.
Sports.
I saw a video where they had it down to like 3 different names they're trying to choose from.
Right.
The coaches were involved and they were putting out teasers about it, but they still haven't let everyone know.
Is one of them? Is one of them the
Savage is right out, right?
I was going to make a joke. Is one of them the Hogan family? Okay, never mind. Back during the day when that show was out, they had this poll that they wanted everyone to take. So okay, never mind. It was a really bad joke.
They could have put it out to the internet and then came back with a name like Bally McBallface.
Yeah, I'm surprised they're having trouble naming these teams. I mean, it seems to me like every high school and every middle school in the country has a football team with named teams.
Well, I mean, even this is happening on the local level here in my county. One of the towns, Newton, their ball team is the Braves, and they're going through a whole big thing, with renaming or deciding whether or not they're going to rename it. And I mean, I live in right-wing country, so people are all up in arms. They're like, going to Board of Ed meetings and county commissioner meetings and threatening the governor.
See, the thing that gets me about it is like the names are an issue. Although to me, far worse than the names are the logos. Like if you look at the logos for like the Cleveland Indians and the Atlanta Braves, let's just say Cleveland Indians, it's a bucktooth Indian. That's terrible. I mean, it's so stereotypical. It's gross. And then the Braves, they do that. The fans do that obnoxious chop bullshit every time somebody gets on base, and I mean, even beyond the fact that it's offensive, morally offensive, it's annoying as fuck.
I mean,
I just, as a designer, I wonder why this is such a problem. It's like, people make logos all the time. I worked on a game where we made 30 fake team logos for race cars. Like a couple of designers did that. Like,
Well, I mean,
it's not that hard to name and logo things.
No, it's not. That's not. I don't really think that's the issue. The real issue is that you can't change something that I'm used to. I don't care if it's offensive.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Right. It's the lack of will, and that really comes down to most problems we have. Right. It's not that we don't have a solution for it, like we don't know what to do. Is that we don't have the will to do it collectively.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to bring up what Joe just said a second ago, because I mean, to me, the name itself shouldn't necessarily be what is offensive. It's like you say, it's the depiction that goes along with it. Because I mean, like, where does it stop? For example, if anybody who's been anywhere in the west of the Mississippi will, you drive from Mississippi to California, you're going to drive through 2 or 3 dozen towns that have the names of some Native American words. I'm not even sure what they are. If the place names are names of things, or I mean, but you can tell they come from Native American origins. Like every state has dozens of them, right? So, what happens? Do all those get changed as well?
No, I think that's a very different consideration, because we're talking about places that are probably gaining their name from the original name that land was. So, if we're talking about Milwaukee as an example.
Right. I was thinking exactly that one.
Famous, from Wayne's World example. But, we've got Oneida here in the Oregon area, Puyallup, and, lots and lots and lots of places. These are simply maybe slightly anglicized versions to make them more pronounceable for the Westerners who came here, but these are still essentially the original place names.
Right.
I think
that's probably more common on the West than the East, but.
Oh no! Well, actually, no. In New Jersey.
Oh yeah, Massachusetts.
I was just going to say. I mean, I think that's the case here, though, because we have like Paramus and Parsippany,
Wanamasa,
Hohokus. Hohokus. That's just right in an hour radius from my front door. And then there's a lot more. I mean, Minisink, and there's lots and lots of Passaic. And I like a lot of those places that was the name of the place, or it was named for the people that lived there.
Right.
So,
yeah, I think that's very different than a corporate logo.
Yeah. See, I think there's a difference between like Indians or even Braves and Redskins. Like, was it Chris Rock? And we're talking back in the 90s, had this joke about that. He said like, the Washington Redskins, he said that's like the Newark Negroes, and he didn't say Negroes. It was Redskin was always an offensive. It was intentionally an offensive term, and so So I do see that as somewhat different than like the Braves. There's nothing inherently wrong about Braves, but
Well, there's also a difference between just having the name of a place and something that is designed to make money.
Yeah, I think that's what the essential difference is if you're naming something in order to utilize, somebody else's tragedy to sell your product. That does strike me as a little, tasteful.
Yeah.
Was it the Redskins? They had the mascot logo, the logo of the Indian that wasn't actually an offensive. It was like a portrait of an actual person. I don't remember.
It was a profile of a face with 2 feathers coming down off the ponytail, I believe. But maybe I'm misremembering that because it's been a long time.
Yes, that's correct.
That's a portrait of an actual person. That's a portrait that was basically the team had basically, from what I understand, gotten the go-ahead to use because it was a portrait of an actual chief. And
I think it might even have been the same profile that used to be on the nickel back around the turn of the 20th century, but I could be wrong about that. But it's very similar profile.
Yeah,
anyway.
it's very similar. Yeah. But because what I try to equate it to, like, okay, if we had a tribe like the I'm trying to think of an African tribe, like the Harlem Hutus, actually, I mean, the context there probably wouldn't work because we didn't specifically subjugate the Hutus So I think that's a big part of it. It's really the cultural appropriation of that. These are people that were marginalized and in many cases still being marginalized and driven, near to extinction. So the idea of, that we're taking something from them by force and making money off of it.
Right.
So the Vikings is okay because they were never marginalized. They were always pretty much the aggressors through.
Pretty much.
It's also like it's pretty different from the Indians, which was not a self-applied moniker, at least not originally. I know it's complicated now. Like if you go to reservations today, most Native Americans will call each other Indian, but we didn't name the Vikings by misidentifying where they came from.
Well, also the other thing too is, technically speaking, Viking is not a people. Viking is a profession.
Right.
The raiders were Vikings. The people were Norsemen.
Right. And also the Vikings were the colonizers.
Yes.
So.
In some cases, yeah. In lots of cases, they weren't colonizing; they were just acquiring supplies and returning home.
We already had.
That's the British.
They became the British. They were basically white people who were just taking shit from everyone else.
Also known as looting and pillaging.
Yeah.
We already have like the Patriots and the Washington Senators. We could name this Washington team the Colonizers.
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, what's wrong with calling them the Washington Presidents or something along those lines? Like, again, I don't see it as a very difficult thing to name them. I think Raven's absolutely right. The difficulty is in getting people to accept any name that isn't the original.
Yeah, let's just go for the resurrected Kennedys. That's perfect.
Yeah.
well, the thing is, it's not wanting to change in general. It's also then to make that kind of change is to acknowledge the history of white supremacy in this country, which a lot of people don't want to. They don't want to go that step.
Yeah.
Or they'll say yes. They'll say yes. They'll acknowledge it in the abstract, but when it comes to actually concrete measures to actually get away from it, they don't want to take those steps.
Oh yeah, you're talking about liberals now.
Well, speaking, I don't know what's going to happen, but I mean, like a lot of these crazy right wingers at the moment are trying to do what you really need to do to get a political movement going, which is to take over things like school boards and local assembly meetings and all this kind of stuff. They're doing the groundwork, and it's kind of scary because as much as I want to laugh at them, that's how you do it if you're going to do it.
Well, and this is I've been saying for over 2 decades now, that the problem on the left, for one, we're very fractured because we have a lot of different interests. That's the downside of diversity, is that we have a lot of different interests. Yeah. And that people, they seem to choose one path or another and don't realize that you need an overarching strategy. So like, Jack and I have talked, Jack prefers, like marching and protesting, which is important. And for me,
direct action, to be clear.
Right. And for me, it was legislative action, but I'm not only for legislative action. I think both are important. And the thing is, it's not just this focus on this fixation on the presidency. I mean, the presidency is important, but if you don't have support in Congress, your agenda goes nowhere. And because of gerrymandering, if you don't have support at the state level, you don't control the state legislatures and the governorships, you don't get to fix the gerrymandering or make it more to your favor. So it's this whole big thing, and the way you build, and particularly to me, the way I could see a progressive agenda really growing in this country is if we actually had a true grassroots electoral approach of saying, let's get progressives at all levels of government, starting at the bottom and work our way. And because that's literally what the right wing has done. The people that are in power now, they started this shit over 50 years ago.
Yeah, the John Birchers and everybody else. But that's the other aspect, is that in terms of the overarching strategy, they had think tanks. And while there are progressive think tanks, and this is probably the inherent problem with think tanks, is that they get co-opted pretty quickly by interests. I mean, as soon as you have, British Petroleum supporting, the a New American Progress or some of these other sort of so-called progressive think tanks, what you have is them insinuating themselves into the conversation to make sure that nothing really changes too quickly. And on the liberal slash progressive slash left side, you're never going to have as much money. It's just not the way it works. But you do need to have think tanks. You need to have thought leaders who are making concrete strategy for how people do take things over.
And the other thing we really need to, and I said this last week, we need real allyship, not one-way allyship, because that's not really allies.
Right.
Allyship, or we're all part of one group or another. We're all getting stepped on one way or another.
Yeah, in the left we call it mutual aid, but it's
right. And saying, instead of arguing at who has it worse, because it doesn't really fucking matter.
Yeah.
Is that, but our needs are so much in common, even though, I would say the marginalization is different and manifests in different ways and in the different degrees, but we largely need the same thing. There's some things or margins or things in the margin that might be different, but there's so much at core that in common. But people get into the all or none, like I've got to get 100% of my version or screw the other guys, as opposed to saying, well, hey, maybe 75% we agree on. Well, let's get that 75%.
Yeah.
We can. I'd love to have the fight over the 25% after we get the 75%.
Yeah. And what we see is the left silos where everybody kind of goes into their own corner. All I ever see, and all I've seen in my whole participation, has been constant fragmenting into smaller and smaller groups rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
That's a sign of a healthy debate, if you ask me. But when it comes to actually focusing policy and leadership, there needs to be way more coherent sort of unity, and I don't know who the leaders in Congress, quite frankly, are so old guard now. It's very difficult. I mean, as much as respect as some of them might deserve, which is open to vigorous debate, but I mean, they've been there far too long, and there needs to be a new generation coming up. And because all of these people are going to end up going out at the same time, and there's going to be people with much less experience of exactly how to grease the levers, as it were, of government. And I worry about the generation.
But see, there's one difference though. See, what you're talking about is, so you're talking about different schools of thought, which is true. We do, different schools of thought and healthy debate is important. But I think what Jack's talking about is that basically those schools of thought become intractable, and then instead of looking for common ground between them, they break off and they separate from each other. Instead of cooperating and trying to find common ground, like somehow compromise has become a dirty word. Compromise has been equated with defeat, and I
disagree with that, Joe, because they're constantly trying to compromise with the fucking enemy on the other side of the aisle.
I'm talking about compromising within ourselves. I'm not talking about the right way. I'm talking on the left.
On the local scale, there's this, what I always talk about is leftist musical chairs, where, in order to maintain one sort of adherence to the group, you've got to find somebody else in the group who isn't sufficiently, dedicated enough and point them out. And this happens a lot in sort of small leftist circles, where rather than focusing on whatever the larger big picture is, everybody is sort of trying to expose each other. And I think some of this probably goes all the way back to COINTELPRO, where people realized that, there were literal FBI agents in their midst. But it has made leftist circles pretty paranoid and pretty likely to excommunicate and shun one another. And what you get is these groups that fragment into two groups because they disagree on one point of procedure or whatever, and then and in some ways it's not that different from like Christianity or these larger sort of Pentecostal movements, but it's sort of the Pentecostalism of the left. That
I'll give you an example, right? I watched a couple of excerpts from Bill Maher last night, and he's there bitching about AOC's comment about that abortion's not just a women's issue. And, I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole. I don't know if any of you have seen it or not, but suffice to say, this is exactly the kind of argument that we're talking about. What he didn't seem to appreciate is the fact that she said something that he personally considered controversial meant it kept getting talked about. And isn't that kind of the point? Isn't that one form of leadership, is controlling the conversation, taking it away from these idiots who want us to talk about all this other stuff, which is completely a distraction, especially as regards to the abortion issue,
And as I mentioned last week, of falling for the bait when the other side tosses these out. Like, okay, Anthony Weiner, the second time he ran, he fucked up bad and he needed to go. But the first time, I didn't care that he was sending dick pics. I didn't give a fuck about dick pics. But the right was like, oh, he's sending dick pics. And then we acted like we gave a shit. And then or that woman out in California that was in Congress, a wonderful representative.
Katie, was her name Katie something?
Yeah. And so there's pictures of her in a threesome, totally consensual. And so what do we care? We don't care. We don't care about threesomes. We don't care about possible lesbian sex or whatever. None of that bothers us. Why the fuck did we let that become the story? Why did we care? Why didn't we tell them to fuck off? Because that's what they tell us when their guys do all sorts of heinous shit.
Yeah.
Joe, have you got a link to that threesome video?
Yeah, But that one got me. I don't understand why anyone on the left gave that more than 3 seconds, because nothing that she did was wrong. None of it. And none of it violated any leftist values. If anything, they were totally on board with leftist values.
Right. Yeah, and then you have the Louisiana conservative congressman caught wearing diapers and whatever, and they'll keep their position because of course the bigger picture is kept in mind.
Right.
Which judges are they going to appoint? How are they going to affect state laws that are being written, that kind of stuff. And I don't know that people on the left actually see each other as having this larger kind of solidarity, and I'm not sure exactly what to do about it. I do think it's somewhat endemic to the left, and I'm not sure that we. It's hard to say if we have the capacity to change that.
Well, here's part of the problem, Jack, because like you said, the lack of think tanks, the lack of having like ideological centers and intellectual centers that we can point to that kind of create the talking points and do all the things. There's a lot of people on the left who strictly do not understand functionally how the government actually works, how these things get done. Like somebody who used to be on this panel, during the 2016 primary, they were fixated on president. And I said, well, okay, that's great. Go for that person for president. But we also, if you want to get a progressive agenda out there, you also have to get people in the House and the Senate. And they literally told me we can worry about that later. Like, no, the primaries are at the same time. When you're voting for that person for president, there's also a primary for your representative and possibly your senator if that's up for election this year. So you have to do it now at the same time. And if you don't, even if you get your person in president, you're not going to get the results you want out of Congress once that person is president, because that's how the system works. And they were just convinced that no, they can get that later. I'm like, well, you can't undo the primary after it's done, after that bell is rung. So if you want progressive, you need to get out there and vote for him.
Yeah, that was sort of the point of Justice Democrats. And it's interesting that, many of the founders of Justice Democrats have kind of distanced themselves from it in large part because that is simply one of the realities of leftist groups, is that kind of consistent infighting. And in some ways, like, I think the good aspect of it is that we're not particularly driven by leaders. And you know me, I'm a great big Bernie Sanders fan, but even with Bernie Sanders, as soon as he sort of like conceded and said everybody vote for Joe Biden, it's not like leftists were just going to listen to exactly what he had to say on everything and follow him, because we simply don't operate that way,
Right.
And so everybody was immediately looking for the next kind of either person, maybe that was AOC or somebody like that, to invest that energy into.
Well, the thing is, though, and that's part of the problem, though, because I think, like, when I vote, I remember one big thing, that in both of the last two elections, I've talked to people on the left, and they get about, well, this person doesn't inspire me, whatever. I don't care about inspiration. I really don't, because I know that even the most sincere politician, a certain amount of what they say is theater, and so I don't really get too edified by the stuff. I look at what are they in practice? What are they angling for? And like I said, for me, my first view on voting is defensive. How do I stop more bad shit from happening? And then, hey, if I have the opportunity to actually do better than that, I absolutely will take it. But so I have to look at, okay, what does this mean in as far as the overall calculation? Like my thing right now. Okay, obviously Joe Manchin's holding up a lot of shit.
Right.
But the problem is we can't get rid of Joe Manchin, because then we lose the Senate, and then we're even more fucked. So my thing
this is exactly what pisses me off about Joe Manchin, is because he's wielding his power. I mean, no one person should be able to hold up the entire program for the party, because
Right.
that one person could cost the whole party re-election next time around, which is just a short distance away.
Here's the beautiful thing about Joe Manchin and his power, though. It's going to be very, very short-lived.
Right.
It won't be long before either the Democrats are just going to be like, we just don't need you anymore, so we're not even going to bother with including you in our caucus. Bye, motherfucker. Or the Republicans will be the guys that are in charge, and he'll just be a lackey.
Right.
Right.
So
Yeah,
so
but he'll just
basically-
switch party like Lieberman. Like, one of the things is there aren't consequences for being on the right in this way in politics. Like, you're never going to have Joe Manchin, feel sorry for himself 5 years from now for making the wrong choice. He's only ever going to be rewarded for it.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but the thing is, the way to marginalize Joe Manchin is to get more Democrats in the Senate, and then he becomes irrelevant. Whether he votes with us or not, we don't care.
Fingers
You're talking
crossed.
about the child tax credit that a lot of people in this country with kids are enjoying right now.
Yeah.
We are. They were talking about, it was an interview in his home state about that child tax credit, and he said there's like no qualifications to get it. There's like no, you just get it if you have kids. I mean, there is no, you don't have to earn it, or you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. And I don't think that's something I'll support in the future. And I'm just like, that people in your home state watching you on the local news, because it was a West Virginia thing, are going, dude, what? You want to take money away from us now?
Right.
And isn't kind of the whole point that you don't have to do anything to deserve it? It's a universal benefit for people with children. I mean, it's not actually universal. It stops at 150 or 125 or something like that. I can't remember what the ceiling is, but parents who earn a lot of money, in the top 1% probably, don't get the benefit. But everybody else,
Right. I mean,
I see the universality of it as a good thing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's specifically for the poor and for the middle class. And this guy who is the the senator representing a state that is both poor and middle class, is saying, no, fuck everybody that voted for me.
Yeah, I mean, he well, the problem is he's trying to do this electoral calculation that what he thinks will get him reelected. And dude, the problem is, it's basically something I remember hearing this expression a long time ago, and I've said it myself. If you give the voters the choice between Republican and Republican light, they'll vote Republican every time. So he's not going to win, and he's not going to. In fact, he's probably not going to be reelected in 2024, one way or the other. So, but the thing is that he doesn't have to. Here's where he's also stupid too, because he's not up for reelection for 4 years. People have short memories. People aren't going to remember what he's doing now, and that's one of the advantages of being a senator is you got like 4 years pretty much that you can do whatever.
Well, I think they'd remember it if he voted for them to keep on having the child tax credit payments coming every month. I think they'd remember that pretty well because they're going to be screaming when they take it away.
And anybody who wants to, no
like this,
matter what side of the aisle they're on, they're going to use that against him. So I mean, if people forget, they will be reminded.
He'll just become a corporate lobbyist when he's voted out. Like,
most likely. But I mean, the course that he's on now is like Joe said, he's trying to do this electoral strategizing.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
No.
He can't be both the Democrat who's really a Republican from West Virginia while taking away benefits that his Democratic voters who put him in office are benefiting from.
Right.
I mean, you can't play all sides of every issue.
He reminds me of Leonard Lance, who lost in 2018 to Tom Malinowski in my district. And it's funny, Leonard Lance actually, Philip actually had him over to our office, like when he was in office. And what was funny about Leonard Lance is that he was Republican, but he voted against Trump probably a third of the time. But it was very much calculated. It was the things in New Jersey that, he couldn't vote against the things that he knew New Jerseyans would like. But all he ended up doing was he pissed off the Republicans because he voted too much with the Democrats, and he pissed off Democrats because he voted Republican more than he voted Democrat. So he ended up getting crushed because he tried to be all things to all people, and people knew he was just a craven politician like every other. So they didn't want him back. And that's one thing I will say. That one mistake that the Democrats have made over time, and unfortunately, though, it's been like they got so much negative reinforcement, they kind of drove in this direction. So, back in the early '90s, it actually really started with '94 when the Republicans swept into Congress. So it looked to the Democrats like, well, that's what people want. We got crushed, and the Republicans came in large numbers. So we'll try to tack toward the center to try to get some of those voters back. Just
the ratchet effect.
Right. And then, of course, and then over time, they just kept ratcheting and ratcheting. And I understand why they ratcheted, but it ultimately was not successful.
Because they ratchet, that's why.
But the thing, so now they're to the point where core constituencies like blue collar workers that was their in the 80s, that was their, and even early 90s, that was their core constituency. They blue collar workers vote Republican in large number now.
Green Machine, what are his Democrat voters going to do? Vote Republican? They don't have to do anything. In West Virginia, the Democrats are the minority easily. Right. It's a Republican. It's a red state. It's a Republican state. He's lucky as hell to be in the position he's in, and he got into that position by strategizing.
Yeah. And if progressives run, a more progressive person to primary him, the Democratic Party will simply bury that primary campaign to make sure that Joe Manchin wins, so that he'll be the opponent in the general election, and then he'll lose to the Republican, because that's what the Democratic Party does. Is it kills any progressive, grassroots movement that tries to upset whatever the establishment can.
The only thing is, though, is I don't know that a progressive grassroots could win in West Virginia. In a lot of states, they could. I think it could win in North Carolina. It came close.
Richard Ojeda did pretty well back in 2016, considering he was from West Virginia, and he got a lot of traction in West Virginia because he was a pretty straight talking, hardcore West Virginia kind of guy. I mean, but he was going to run again in 2020, but he bowed out because he realized that he couldn't really, in good conscience, ask people to donate to his campaign when he could see that he wasn't going to get the kind of media attention that was necessary to mount a good campaign. And I think it's really speaks well of his personality that he realized that people are going to be donating their hard-earned money to me. I can't let him do that unless I think I've got a real shot, you know?
So Green Machine, exactly, they can't replace Manchin with something more progressive. Yeah, and that's actually a problem because I don't think Manchin can win again. He's been exposed as an absolutely craven piece of shit. Democrats aren't. Some Democrats will support him. West Virginia Democrats are a little bit different than some others, but a lot of them won't. If anybody runs against him, like an independent who is a bit left-leaning runs, he'll be absolutely buried. I mean, the Republicans are just going to walk away with West Virginia like they've always had it. They technically have.
Right. Hey, I want to slightly change the subject from Joe for a second because something this week happened that I found personally quite interesting. So there was like the Met Gala in New York, and you guys must know that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wore a designer dress to the Met Gala that said "Tax the Rich" in great big blood red letters across the back of the dress and down the bottom of the dress. I thought the dress was fantastic, but the point is, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it because to go to the Met Gala, you have to be invited by someone for a start. You can't just buy a ticket or whatever. And even if you're invited, you still have to pay $30,000 to be at the Met Gala.
Or somebody has to pay that, not necessarily.
Okay, but then that's a definite contribution, right? I mean, so it just, I find it a little bit uncomfortable for someone with the coming where she's supposed to be coming from. Please help me out here.
Why?
So I don't find that part uncomfortable at all. I do think that if you're going to deploy activism or satire, it ought to be pointed enough to get you kicked out.
Right. I mean, she didn't pay for anything. The dress was donated. Her entry was donated. And
was it? Okay, that makes sense to me then.
No, she didn't pay anything.
So she basically was there to make a political statement, which makes way more sense to me than sort of paying to get in.
And the money that was paid, I mean, it's not a for-profit event. It's a charity. And the charity is the gala itself. It's the Met. But the Met is like one of the top 10 museums in the world. So it's actually a donation to a museum for educational work. So, I mean, it's still a charity. So it's not like this was some big profit-driven thing.
No,
it was a charity event.
And actually, the reaction you had, Paul, is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about before. Is that when we on the left, we and Jack was talking about it too, like
this
cutting.
Is exactly why I wanted to talk about it. That's exactly why I wanted to talk about it because I'm like, hang on a minute, this is one of those things I've been watching the arguments going on, and I'm like. It makes so much sense to me, Raven, to learn that the dress was donated and the ticket was that makes more sense to me because I thought I was kind of I don't get me wrong, never met her, never will meet her, but I kind of thought I had a sort of feel for what she was going for in terms of her career and what kind of how she wanted to operate her career with some sort of ethical standard. And I'm not saying it's not ethical necessarily, but if she paid $30,000 to get in, I don't know how I would have felt.
Yeah, I don't know who thought she paid for it because I think that was pretty common knowledge that both the dress was donated and her ticket cost.
I had questioned it, but I really appreciate Raven clarifying that.
Yeah,
that was very. I'm glad that Got That Funk asked that question as well.
Go ahead.
Here's the problem I have with the whole line of questioning, though, is that even if just say she wrote a check out of her own money, well, to me, there's nothing ethical about using your own money, especially if you're going to make a political point. So that's saying, hey, people who have it should put the money in to do these things. So commerce isn't evil and money is not evil. And if you use the money, it's how you use the money, what you use it for. If you use it to try to do good. then you shouldn't be. To me, you shouldn't be criticized for it because
That's a fair point.
a positive thing.
That was pretty much where I was going to go. Like, if it wasn't donated and she paid for the ticket out of her own pocket, well, commerce isn't really evil. But the argument could be made that she is like putting money towards, this capitalistic blah 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 blah. But that wouldn't be the case either, because, like I said, it was a charity event.
Yeah.
Right.
So even
I don't really care about either of those things. I feel like, I'm not one of the people who's mad at Bernie Sanders for having 3 houses or what have you. It's just not something.
This can work out. The best possible way this can work out. No one paid for her ticket. She did not pay for the ticket. The Met Gala invited her.
Oh wow!
Because of her position in the overseeing some of the arts budget in New York, and politicians are regularly invited to the Met Gala as such. So there was no thing like bribery going on, or like lobbying.
Right.
No one paid for the ticket. No one paid for the ticket.
That's good to know.
But see, that's the thing, though. On the left, there's that knee-jerk reaction. There's that assumption that Jack was talking about, that paranoia, that assumption of the trying to find it to be the holier than thou. Oh, I got you doing the bad thing.
But she did get hit with an ethics complaint, and I'm not sure if there's actually an argument to be made there, because I mean, if it was just given to her as an invite to the Met Gala by the Met, well, that's a $30,000 or whatever it was, entry cost gift.
There is value to it, because regularly, even before her, politicians had been invited to the Met as a matter of because of their role.
I understand.
It's not a gift, though.
I understand what you're saying. But that just because politicians are frequently invited to it does not remove the value of the thing. And the value of the thing is what's typically in question when there's an ethics complaint. So it just because nobody has ever had a complaint lodged against them before doesn't mean that they were right in accepting the invitation. I personally don't give a shit. I think I'm loving what she did and that she went. But
my only complaint is that it's not more pointed. I think it could have stood to be like, wealth tax now, because
fuck the rich.
Tax the rich is a pretty milquetoast. Every 75% or more of people basically agree with that. It's not really targeting anyone. If it had said Biden tax the rich, there's a few things that I would have felt like if you modified the message to make it just a little bit more targeted, a little bit more pointed, then maybe
fuck the rich would have been better.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Actually, I want to address something.
That's my only critique.
I'm going to address something that Mike said, because he said that it wasn't lobbying. See, here's another problem. Because there are bad lobbyists that lobby for bad things, we have this idea that lobbying is bad inherently, and it's not necessarily. It can be, but I mean, I've got a someone in the family.
You have the ADA, which is a lobby, making sure that curbs have cutouts for wheelchairs. Like, lobbying is how the people talk to their legislators.
That's right. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers is a lobbying organization.
It's corporate.
Right, corporate lobbyists are problematic.
It could be considered lobbying in that they have been inviting politicians who make sure that there's a budget for donating to the arts since the beginning of time. And they've been giving them free entry into this, saying, hey, look at this gala that we throw.
But don't you see how
important that is to culture?
But it's also kind of a self-serving thing to invite politicians who are in charge of spending of the arts by giving them a free ticket. That makes it even more problematic, because then, there is a favor to be repaid. There was a gift that someone might say that they're expecting something in return for, especially when it's $30,000. So, but as far as like lobbying, I mean, I have just pictures floating. I don't have any of them. I wish I did. I don't even know where to find them. But there's pictures of me floating around, shaking hands with lawmakers in New York State in Albany. When I was the group that was, anti-child abuse, where I went with a lobbying group to Albany to to shake some trees.
If you write a letter to your Congress, your representative or your senator, you make an appointment and show up in their office, you're lobbying. It's just a matter of in what form does that lobbying take, and what's the expectation out of that, and are you an actual constituent or not, and is money involved in all that, and what are you lobbying for? But it's unfortunate it's become a shorthand, like, oh, lobbyists. If it's the defense industry, yeah, that's probably a bad thing.
Another way that lobbyists got like a bad name is a lot of politicians who know all the ins and outs of the government and how it's run and how to get appointments and how to get things done. When they leave office, they become lobbyists, high-paid lobbyists, and that's not good.
That's a problem. Yeah. Hey, I've got a fun game to play, right? We'll start with Raven and go around counterclockwise and end with me. All right. Supposing that you could
talking about our balls again.
No, supposing that you could be a paid lobbyist for anything in the world, right? What would you be a paid lobbyist for? And give me your best pitch. Kazoom's dreading it getting to him. What would you be a lobbyist for, Raven?
Ethics in government.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah. And your best pitch
is we need ethics in government.
Ethics is good. We need ethics. Yeah. Okay, maybe it's a bad thought experiment. I apologize. I'll spare you.
Well, I suppose with me it would be just something that would try to end world hunger and allow medical care for the absolute worst people. Worst suffering people in the world. Something like that. Something worldly.
Mike?
I'd probably advocate for mental health, but specifically for preventative mental health measures, so that we can have better outcomes in our country. Jack?
Oh, just cock and ball torture for all the other lobbyists. Every other lobbyist on the Hill gets tortured.
Yeah, but what about the ones that are into it?
Well, double win for them.
For me, it's easy. I would definitely won't be a lobbyist for, some form of universal health care. And I don't care whether you call it Medicare for all or it comes in some other form, as long as it meets the goal of making sure that everybody in the country, citizen or not, has access to both prophylactic and acute medical care, and that they don't pay out of pocket at the point of distribution, and that we simplify the regulations so that if it's being paid for the government. You still have regulations on the drug companies, still have regulations on the medical device and the deliverers of the healthcare, but that you can anyone, if you're sick, you can go to a healthcare provider and get some fucking healthcare.
Anywhere in the country.
And so you don't have to worry about portability. You don't have to worry about whether you're working or not working. There's none of this idea that you have to deserve healthcare. Right. We all deserve healthcare because we're all fucking humans and live in this country, however we got here. And strictly from even a greedy capitalist perspective, having a healthy populace is actually good for the capitalists too.
Yeah, but capitalists don't think in the long term.
No, they don't.
It's all quarterly.
So I think maybe I would be like, a lobbyist for the benefit of the state of New Jersey. And here's my pitch. I got an offer you can't refuse.
Joe, are you just thinking about universal health care because that's like a long-time passion, or because you right now are witnessing how run down the Cleveland area is?
A little bit of both. But like I said, as a business owner who provides healthcare coverage to my employees, I see, again, even from a strictly capitalistic perspective, how ridiculous the payment system that we have is. So
Yeah.
why am I as an employer involved in my employees' healthcare decisions in any way, shape, or form? I have nothing to do with their healthcare. If anything, I'm an obstacle to their coverage, to their care. That's stupid. I don't want to be an obstacle, and I also don't want to have to deal with, because I provided, I have all these regulations I have to follow, and if I don't follow them, I can get sued, I can get fined out of existence. And so that I have to devote time and effort to something. Just give me a bill, man. I'll just pay the fucking bill. I'm happy to pay the bill and not have to deal with all the other shit.
Well, I was also going to say healthcare, Joe, but I frankly couldn't have said it better than you, because you covered pretty much all the bases like 2 laps around. So I hate to disappoint everybody, but I'll just advocate for legalization nationally for cannabis. I know that's a shock to all of you, but I guess that's what I would do. Yeah, because I think I'd enjoy that the most. I mean, those would be some pretty fun meetings with senators, right?
Man, my answer was lame.
See, I actually have a secondary answer.
Okay.
My secondary answer would be prison reform, because the prison system is a big bag of shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously my answer exposes that I don't really believe that any of those things would be effective without, massive financial backing. Yeah, I would absolutely, answering the question, would free healthcare include care for the unvaccinated? 100%. No question about it.
Right. I mean, basically, the problem we have right now with the unvaccinated is that they're overwhelming the system. And so people who have other things going on aren't getting things. But if we actually had a proper system that covered everybody and wasn't so, it's not that there wouldn't be any profit in it, but there wouldn't be so profit based, and we wouldn't be wasting 20 to 40% on the VIG on healthcare premiums. We could actually have more providers and more facilities for people to go to, and then there wouldn't be a backlog.
I realize some of the irony of the situation that we're going through with this pandemic, in that some of the people who don't want to take the vaccine don't like how it looks like universal health care, the way that it's paid for by the government program. The rollout is completely free at the point of service, right? It looks like the first step towards healthcare for everybody.
I hope it is.
Right? So they're not taking the vaccine, and then they fill up the hospitals and have them overrun to the point where governors are going to call in the National Guard to help man these hospitals, which to me looks a lot worse as a form of like state-run healthcare.
So yeah, I mean, this is like with the school shootings where conservatives wanted every school to simply hire 2 or 3 armed guards to be on the campus. Conservatives love things that end up looking like police states in the end. Like, they hate freedom.
The funny thing about free healthcare, right, for all, even caring for the unvaccinated, the death toll from COVID wouldn't be as high as it is if we had free healthcare all along.
Right.
A lot of people are dying because of comorbidities. Most of the people that died, I believe, it was comorbidities. They had other issues that either were way advanced or way beyond being cared for, or were never ever cared for to begin with because they didn't go to doctors because either they don't have insurance or their copay was going to be too high. Right. So I mean, so if we had free healthcare for all, the pandemic would have been a completely different animal.
Also, if we had a universal healthcare system, right? Single payer system, I don't think we would have the same level of paranoia about the healthcare system that we currently have. I could be wrong, but I really think people would be used to it, and I don't think they would have this idea that it was this horrible, sinister thing. Because I've heard some people say stuff like, "Oh well, all these healthcare providers are just faking the numbers just to make more money," which is kind of funny. It's like, here you are, you're worried about socialism, and then you're worried about the capitalists making too much money off the system that's not socialist. And it's like, well,
that's an interesting point.
Which do you want? You worry if you're really worried about people skinning off the system, then you'd want a better system of accountability where there wasn't so many private hands grabbing money out of the system.
Right. When I was in the UK, I mean, what you said a moment ago, Joe, about, free at the point of delivery is just so vitally important. I can't really put into words how much freer I felt that I didn't have to worry about it if I got sick. I mean, it's the words don't encompass the peace of mind that can come with that.
My friend Adam died about 4 years ago now of the flu, of pneumonia. He had healthcare coverage, but he had an enormous deductible, like $5,000 or something crazy like that. So he didn't go. He also had problem getting time off of work. By the time he actually went, he had really, his coverage wasn't that great. They gave him oral antibiotics. He should have been in the hospital on IV antibiotics. They gave him oral antibiotics. 3 days later, he was dead because the oral antibiotics did jack dick against pneumonia. So I lost my friend, good, excellent, wonderful, close friend that I had for a decade and a half, because he could, his financial situation, could not afford that $5,000 deductible to go to the hospital.
I can't even, I don't even know how to cope with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had 2 bad bouts of flu in the last decade. The last one, I was in the emergency room, and then I was in the VA hospital for 36 hours before they discharged me. But it was a simple bit of medicine that cured me. It was nothing, drastic. But I was at the point of delirium with the fever. It was very bad, and I caught it from the homeless population that I served. It was a very bad round of the flu. Prior to that, in 2011, I got a case of the flu, but I was not in the VA system yet. I had applied, and there was like a year wait period to get into the VA healthcare system as a regular patient. And I didn't have any health care at all. And I stayed home for a week, and I lost about 20 pounds. It was a good weight loss program, throwing up and having diarrhea at the same time. It was horrible. And I wish I could have gone to the hospital and not incurred thousands upon thousands of dollars of a bill that I couldn't pay for.
Well, and I've mentioned it before, but my wife and I each got sick. This was several years ago. We each got sick where we ended up spending a weekend in the hospital. So we're talking just over like 50 hours, 56 hours. So not basically 2.25 days. And in each case, the bill prior to insurance paying for it was $25,000. So between the two of us, we racked up $50,000 for, again, basically being warehouse. I was on IV antibiotics, and because she had something viral, all they did was pump her with fluids. That was it. And that was $50,000 between the two of us, which is insane.
So it's like $500 an hour.
Yeah. And so, I mean, thankfully if we didn't have any, decent coverage, that would have crushed us at the time. Financially, we weren't doing as well back then. That would have crushed us forever.
There were times that I didn't have insurance and I had to have some medical care. I never paid those bills. Fuck them. I seriously, I've always thought, what are they going to do to me? They can't get blood from a stone, so I'm like, fuck them.
Well, that's the other thing I try to explain to right wingers when they yell, "Oh, I don't want to pay for these other people." I'm like, well, you do already, because when they can't pay the bill, they don't, and then the hospital just tax that cost onto other people to make up the difference. So it's an out of sight, out of mind charge. Just because you didn't see, and I kind of wish that they would do that. They would put on the bill what percentage of your bill is actually to cover the uncovered. And then people will start to see, oh wow, because it's not because anyone's fault. It's not that the people who didn't have money's fault. It's the fact that we have such a ridiculous system means that we are already paying for those people, but not in an efficient way, because if they actually had prophylactic care, half of them wouldn't end up in the emergency room in the first place.
Going back to the housing thing, the average homeless person in Denver incurs at least $100,000 in services that they don't pay to things like the emergency room, the detox, stuff like that. But some of them get up over $1 million per year because they know how to engage with a lot of services that they don't pay for.
Right.
So connected to what you're saying, the green machine saying, if you don't pay, they trash your credit rating. But you know what? There is a certain population of people in this country. I for most of my life, have been among that group of people, that demographic, where I'm so poor, or for the most part in my life, I've been so poor that a credit rating means nothing. You want to trash my credit rating? Okay. But what does that mean to me? That I'm not going to be able to buy my first another car? I mean, it's just, so what?
Well, and see, this is another thing too that gets me with like right-wing thinking, because one of the things I've heard people say where they stand up against a universal system is they have this belief that people will abuse it and just everyone's going to turn into hypochondriacs and overuse the system. But we know for a fact that does not happen. In fact, that whole mentality is why HMOs existed, and they were invented like late 70s, early 80s. So the idea was that they were going to create a gatekeeper so that before you could go to a specialist, you had to go to your primary care doctor and have them evaluate you and say, yes, you should go, or no, you shouldn't go. But turned out, generally speaking, most people are not hypochondriacs. They don't overuse the services. And all it was doing was adding an extra doctor visit that the insurance now had to pay for.
Yeah, people hate going to the doctor.
Right. So what ended up happening is most HMO type things have basically done away with pre-clearance on most things, because, in fact, I was supposed to have, I was going to go to I was suspecting I might have a blood clot in my leg. So I wanted to go have it checked out. And so they tried to do it in the office, and the person was incompetent, so they wanted to send me to the hospital. But they said, well, you have to check and make sure there's no pre-clearance, and there wasn't. So I could just walk to the hospital and say, hey, check me for a blood clot, because it's cheaper for the insurance company to just let me do that. And same thing even with drugs. I mean, you can buy a lot of antibiotics over the counter in certain European countries. Like we actually bought some in Italy. And we don't abuse them. Oh, what happened?
It's all Paul.
There we go. Paul
again.
Well,
Paul's the one that matters.
But I mean, but so they basically the rhetoric is always that, well, you don't need the government. People don't need the government to manage their affairs. They're capable of doing it on their own. But their policies are based on the idea that people are absolute, complete, incompetent scumbags.
or that they're very, very competent scumbags.
Oh. Like back when Bill Maher was funny, he had this joke about, we don't have our motorcycle policy based on Gary Busey, and yet we have our drug policy based on Gary Busey. We need a consistent Gary Busey policy.
So even when you apply, to rent an apartment, they look at your credit rating. When you apply to do anything at all, anywhere ever in the history of things, they look at your credit rating. But some people just can't afford to care about their credit rating, because the here and the now and the immediate takes precedent. So that's what the vast majority of poor people, that's what their poverty is like. It's right. Now. Can I eat now? Can I get a Band-Aid now? In the future, I might have to apply for rent, to rent an apartment. I will cross that bridge when I come to it, because I can't afford to worry about it now, because I have to eat and I have to keep myself warm and I have to get socks, whatever the fuck it is, but it's now.
Yeah. And the thing is, right, and the truth is, at the very bottom end, there are places that will rent without a credit check, because they know the people that nobody that they rent to or actually could pass. And that's where slumlords come in, right? And that's why slumlords get away with doing what they do, because the people who live there have very few options. They can't go to those places.
And so at the beginning, we were talking about like homeless people, and when I came on, I was just saying that it was very expensive to be poor. I mean, that's some of the things that's why. Like the last apartment that I rented, I've only rented one apartment in my life actually. So the apartment that I rented, I didn't have a job. I didn't even have an income when I got that apartment. That was where my YouTube channel was born, was in that apartment. Anyway, the guy that owned the house I was renting out the apartment was gay. So I just appealed to his gayness, and I'm just like, hey, we're family. I need help. I need a place to stay, my kids, and fellow gay person. And it worked.
Yeah, it does make a difference. Or sometimes some people will get a co-signer. They'll get a relative who's not broke and get somebody to co-sign for them.
Mhm.
I've co-signed for people before.
You co-sign for people?
I'd be terrified to ask someone to co-sign for me. Yeah.
So I want to know who is buying these people.
Buying people?
You co-signed. Who was the purchaser?
It was very expensive.
For sure. What's a person going for these days?
More than you'd think.
Yeah, right.
Well, see, the thing is, I co-signed from that, but I could have tangented. It's a geometry joke. Cosine, sine, tangent. You had to be there.
It went over my head.
Yeah, it's geek humor.
Hey,
Which reminds me, there are people that I see on the internet occasionally that they get upset about something that they think is like anti-geek, and they're making fun of geek culture, and they're like, "Well, I'm a geek," and I'm like, "No, you're not. You're not. You were not at any of the meetings. You don't play any of the games. Playing Xbox doesn't make you a geek. Stop trying to appropriate geek culture." Like I know some people some people like Big Bang Theory, but some people don't. But I've had people tell me that it's insulting to geeks. I'm like, I went to college with people like that. Like I know people like that.
So I don't think that geek or nerd or any of that stuff applies to me anymore. I don't know. I just don't think it does. But when I was in school, I was absolutely, I was jokingly, I was the king of the nerds. Because I was basically like the leader. I was the coolest of the uncool. So
yeah. When I was in college, the school I went to, we counted. We had like 17 different words to describe someone's level of nerddom.
wow.
So it was just like Eskimos with snow,
Right. Well, I was so far. When I was in school, I was so cool, nobody fucking realized it. That's how cool I was.
Yeah, I was definitely not in the know. Like basically by the time I knew it. See, that's the thing. So anytime I knew it, I knew it was no longer cool because I knew it.
Well, I suffer from my generation, okay, because I grew up watching Happy Days. It's one of the few shows that like my whole family could agree on, in fact, and so we had the Fonz. And the thing is, I thought this when I was a teenager, or even whenever I might not have even been a teenager yet when that show was brand new. But I always thought this. I mean, the Fonz, everyone treats the Fonz like he's cool, but the Fonz isn't really cool. Not really. He just acts like everyone. I don't know. It's really weird. It was like this whole mutual reinforcement thing where the Fonz is just made out to be cool and everyone's afraid of him, but he never actually does anything really scary except for go, make an expression. And that's got to be it. You lay off because the Fonz looked at you funny. I mean, it was really weird how he controlled everything without actually being tough or cool.
But that was it. He was so tough that he scared people by not doing anything.
So I mean, I grew up with Happy Days too. So yeah, it was amazing that the effect that that show had on society. I hear people talking about TV
I
shows
agree.
today, and they're like, "Oh man, that show jumped the shark." And it's just like, do you know where that comes from? Do you
Those
even
were happy days.
Yeah, it was Happy Days. I mean, it was just like, and they don't know. I'm like, yeah, it's like Fonzie. I'm like, what?
What's a Fonzie?
Fonzie. He
Well,
jumped.
do you remember doing the thing with the quarters? Yeah, you put the quarters on your elbow. And you
Sure, I did that. Yeah, I confess that Happy Days probably directly contributed to me wanting to think of myself and have other people think of me as being like very cool. And when I was really young, I was like super pretentious without realizing there was a word called pretentious. And so like I had this idea that I was going to do everything my own way. How I got in a car, how I got out of a car, how I went upstairs, how I went downstairs, literally everything. I had like my own little style of doing. And that persisted for some time. And I kind of thought I was developing my own sort of individual cool. And then I think I was in my late teens or early 20s. I took a class in body language. And I realized I had to drop it after 3 classes, because I realized I was going to be like circumspect about everything I did. And I was going to be pretentious about how I was presenting myself to project what image I wanted people to think. And then I realized I was doing that my whole life. And so I had to drop the class and also drop like most of the pretenses bullshit that I used to do in terms of the stylized way I'd get in a car and out of a car and bullshit like that. Because I mean, I really was that bad, guys. Honestly.
In the summertime, whenever I could, I left my windows down on my car so I could climb in and out through the window.
That's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
That's also from the Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
I think we all go through that kind of a thing to some degree or another. I mean,
with clothes for sure. I mean, I definitely was one of those guys that did it with clothes too, as well. I mean, it wasn't just how I did things; it was how I dressed. I wanted to be ahead of the curve and all that kind of bullshit,
Right. I mean, like, okay, you spend a certain amount of time in your teen years, and that's what they're for, is finding you. And that takes a lot of experimenting and a lot of, I mean, I'm kind of doing, Riker sitting in a chair. Yeah. I'm actually kind of doing a lot of that whole thing all over again. Lady Tiger Lily recently made a comment about, she's like, she's really impressed by the diversity of my blouses. And I'm just like, I've just got all different kinds of stuff, and I'm just trying to find my style, my look, what works for me.
Yeah, that's cool.
Something that, most women do when they're girls. That's part of their teenage years. So that's what that's for. And I didn't do that. So I'm doing it now. So it's the same kind of a thing. I'm trying to find my own look and style and what looks right and feels right for me. I'm not climbing in through the windows on the car, though. I'm too old. I can't.
Time for a convertible.
Yeah.
You could still jump over the side, man.
Yeah. I mean, if the car sits low enough, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a certain point, I gave up on that and just realized, I was just never going to be in the know. Just was never going to be one of the cool kids. So I just be me. But it's funny, at a certain point in college, I remember in college, I thought of myself as a conformist, that I didn't like that about me. And then one of my roommates was like, he said, "Joe, you're a rebel." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, you like to be part of the group, but you try to make the group be like you, not the other way around." I'm like, "Really?" And I guess I do. Do it my way.
Well, I sort of came to the realization, thanks to that class that I took, that I was performing for people that I didn't even know, and I didn't really need to do that. You know what I mean? So I still like, I guess getting attention or whatever I always have, but it's not a performance so much. It really is me. So I just like it. I can't help it.
I know at one time I was accused of kind of molding myself into a nonconformist mold, and
the nonconformist mold is an oxymoron, surely.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of the point. And I was like, okay, whatever that means, sure.
Yeah, I mean, well, like I think I said a few weeks ago that like a lot of groups that we think of as nonconformists really they're just a more narrowly focused group of conformists, like bikers. I mean, if you don't dress the right way, you don't have the right kind of bike, you don't have the right hair and jacket and all this shit, then you're not part of the group.
Okay, so even if you have the bike and the jacket, that doesn't make you a biker.
No, I know, but I'm saying like if you don't have that, you're you have
Right.
to be all the right,
Punk
just
rock.
even have a chance to be in that.
But punk rock, the whole punk rock thing has always kind of bothered me, because it's just like, if you're not like everybody else who's into punk rock or plays punk rock, you're not punk. But by being like all of them, you're immediately not punk. So it's like it's this thing that everyone claims to be, but can't possibly exist at the same time.
Yeah, it's like being a goth. You think you're being sort of very individualistic, and every goth I've met has their own version of goth going on, to be fair. But it's still a freaking uniform.
Tell them, you're not goth, you're emo.
Right. Oh, wow. But yeah, I'll tell you what, I went to see Bauhaus in 1998. They did a reunion tour, and I went to see them at the Brixton Academy. And you've never seen more goths in one place in your whole life. And me and my wife were there. I must have been in my early 40s. Or no, I guess it was in my late 30s at the time. 98, yeah, it's 36. And you look around, and I mean, I was like the tamest looking person there for sure. And I've got like, 30 odd piercings at that time. And I was still the tamest person there. And like, I'm looking around at all these sort of middle-aged goths thinking to myself, what the fuck do these people do for a living? Because I had a body piercing studio. That was my excuse. And I'm thinking there can't be that many body piercers here. There's just no way,
Well, you reminded me when the Star Wars Star Wars prequels started coming out, and so I went with a friend of mine and his wife to the Phantom Menace, and his wife was kind of like alternative music, like semi-gothic kind of thing. So she dressed up, and she's like, and she was, again, it was all performative. It was like, oh, I'll probably be the weirdest one there, and I'm like, yeah, sure. And then we get there, and there's like grown people dressed like Darth Maul and Obi-Wan, and having lightsaber fights in front of the thing. And then I leaned over and I'm like, you gotta work a lot harder to be weird in this crowd.
You just reminded me of something I really wanted to discuss with the group for weeks. Okay. And I know we've discussed Star Wars a lot in the past, but this is going to be a Star Wars based, that's funny, a Star Wars based question. So my son pointed something out to me that I never actually considered before. Obi-Wan Kenobi is the biggest dick in the entire story. Think about it, right? He totally takes on training Anakin and doesn't do it right. He just lets Anakin run wild. And because of that, everything fucking happens. It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He even went at the very last battle in Revenge of the Sith, when he's duking it out with the lightsabers around the lava and everything, and he jumps up and cuts off both his legs and one of his arms and leaves him there to frickin' die. Thanks very much. I mean, you'd step on a bug, wouldn't you? But no, he watches him catch on fire and doesn't go down and put him out of his misery. And still he gets resurrected by the freaking Emperor because Obi-Wan doesn't have the fucking decency to put him out of his misery. It's all Obi-Wan's fault. Everything. What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, and actually Obi-Wan says as much in Return of the Jedi.
How so?
He says, I thought I could teach, Anakin as well as Master Yoda. I was wrong. And then he basically acknowledges that it's his fault that Vader became Vader.
Yeah. Yes. I suppose he kind of does, but that's weak sauce, man. Because he also said that, Vader wasn't really Luke's father. I mean, he's just, you can't trust Obi-Wan. That's what I'm trying to say. Obi-Wan's slimy. I never really realized it because I always quite liked Obi-Wan, right? I always thought he was kind of cool. And then my son points, I was like, no, Dad, Obi-Wan's the biggest dick in the whole story. And I'm like, and he just listed it all off. And I'm thinking, yeah, everything that happens goes wrong. I mean, Obi-Wan, even when he comes back from the dead to give Luke advice, it doesn't necessarily go great,
This is assuming the prequels are, something that you care about. But
I mean, the prequel Obi-Wan is the one who's really sort of going as the biggest dick, you know. I mean, I have to agree. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, well, that just makes Lucas the bigger dick.
And you know, so anyway, I just found it interesting because I never really considered that before. I always thought quite liked Obi-Wan. To me, was kind of one of the main characters. The only one I liked better than Obi-Wan was R2-D2. But now I don't even like Obi-Wan anymore.
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, I kind of stopped liking Alec Guinness a long time ago because he never really liked being in Star Wars. You know, he just did it for the money, and then he really hated the fact that, you know, obviously he had this big body of work, and then of course once he did Star Wars, most people were like, "Oh, Star Wars," and so he made him bitter. And there was a famous thing of like somebody wrote him asking for an autograph, and he said that he would do it on the proviso that the person never watched Star Wars or did any Star Wars things again. And I'm like, and what bothered me, what really kind of made me realize how bad an attitude that was, is when I met Mark Singer. I met Mark Singer at Gen Con like 2004 or thereabouts, 2005. It was Mark Singer's first convention. He had never gone to one before. And he was like, so it was funny. I was walking through the dealer room. I had some time to kill. And we kind of locked eyes, and he waved me over. So I came over and like, you know, you want to talk to me? He's like, yeah, let's talk. And so, you know, we're talking about the different things he was in. And he was just so overwhelmed by the whole thing. He goes, that I can't believe that there are people here that, you know, they want to talk about stuff I did 20, 25, 30 years ago. And he's like, if you're, as an actor, if people ever care about anything you do, that's a gift. And he said, if they care about something you did decades ago, that's magic. And I was like, man, that's a good fucking attitude, you know? And he was just so overwhelmed and blown away by the whole thing that there's this fandom out there that care about these things from a long time ago.
The thing about that, though, Joe, is, I mean, like, Star Wars was a new phenomenon. Star Wars made it into our culture in a way that movies prior to Star Wars never really did so much. I mean, they might be a fad for a year, like I'm just going to use Saturday Night Fever for an example. But I mean, Star Wars genuinely worked its way into the culture. And I mean, like, Carrie Fisher couldn't go anywhere without being Princess Leia. She couldn't go to freaking any continent on Earth, you know? And Alec Guinness, you know, as you say, had a great body of work. Bridge Over the River Kwai is one of the best movies I've ever watched, right? Just in terms of the way it rolls out. And he's great in it. But I don't know, man. I think nowadays there is more movies, like the Marvel movies is another example, where it's going to take over your life. If you're in the movie, it's going to take over your life, and you just have to get used to that.
Yeah.
You know?
But here's the thing to remember, and that's true. The thing to remember, though, is that basically Alec Guinness was forgotten. So it's not like Star Wars made people forget Bridge on the River Kwai.
Right.
He was already forgotten. And this actually, in some ways, actually kind of brought some more interest in some of his older work. Mm. So in a way, I think I really felt that he was looking at it, you know, I get the fact that he wishes more people knew about his other stuff, but I just think his whole attitude of it was really bad. And for that matter, Shatner was very much the same way. And if you remember the whole Get a Life thing in SNL, well, apparently after that happened, he kind of had an epiphany and felt that he had been wrong about the whole thing. And that instead of, you know, being, you know, bitter about these people, like, embrace them. Like, they're why you still have a career. They're the ones out there who care about you.
Yeah, they have to love the geek. If you're a sci-fi actor or a Marvel actor, they have to love the geeks. That's their bread and butter.
Right. And granted, there are people who go overboard with it. That's true. I mean, you know, there are people who have a hard time separating reality or putting in things in perspective. You know, that's a problem. But
well, I would prefer it if there kind of were superheroes sometimes, but then again, they probably would end up running the world. So no. Yeah.
Well, that's the isn't that the premise of the show on now, like The Boys or something like that? That's the kind of the whole premise that, you know, there are superheroes, but they pretty much, you know, they can get away with doing anything they want because they're super powerful.
maybe it's always been that way. That's the Illuminati, right? I mean, that's basically the same sort of thing that the dragon superhero people, you know.
Yeah, I do recommend The Boys, by the way, if you haven't seen it. It's good satire. It's not exactly as you've put it, and I don't want to spoil anything, but it has a lot of targets, largely corporate targets.
That's pretty
it deals
cool.
with some of the stuff that you expect. You know, whenever you see Starbucks put a pride flag on their cups, it's a lot of that stuff is in there. It's at some points it gets very juvenile, but I think it's in service of the larger satire. I think it's been done pretty well.
Yeah, I've been recommended The Boys by quite a few people. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to get around to watching it. I have so many things I'm supposed to watch. I just reacquired because I used to have it in the UK, but UK DVDs don't work in America, so I left my UK Babylon 5 DVDs behind, and I finally got a new set of Babylon 5 DVDs, and so that's like 110 episodes and 5 movies, and then 13 sequel episodes. So that's a long time of isolation. So
I'm curious, are they going to do a remaster of those?
No.
Obviously the aspect ratio and
that's the problem.
Footage, it doesn't really hold up by today's standards. It's kind of hard.
Yeah, the Babylon 5 was originally shot in widescreen, which was all cutting edge at the time, but it was shot in 4.3 instead of 16:9, and so it's a bit
no, it was shot in 16:9. The problem is it was mastered in 4:3, and that's where the special effects are. So,
right. Okay. That was, I knew there was something to do with why they couldn't convert the digital stuff so easily to Blu-ray, because it's never come out in Blu-ray. And if any show could benefit from enhanced special effects, it's Babylon 5.
Yeah,
because the first season's so rough, man. You know.
Well, here's what they have done. They actually have remastered it in 4:3.
Right.
Now, my understanding is Babylon 5, was it shot on film at any point, or did it go straight to videotape?
No, film. It was all done on
film. Okay.
Yeah, that's what
so
I thought as well.
they can actually remaster the footage. It's just the special effects.
So Hulu, Vudu, Amazon Prime, and HBO Max all have the remastered version. You can see it if you have HBO Max. You can watch it for free. For the others, you have to pay a small amount for the seasons, but yeah, I have watched the remastered version. So it does. It looks like whenever they first put it out, there were some coloration problems, and they had to go back and fix it. And it looks like they corrected that now. So it'll look in 4:3 just like we saw it on TV, but it'll be in HD.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm just looking forward to it. I haven't watched it for a few years now, and I get so much out of that show compared to, I mean, a lot of people I watch it have talked about it with. They're like, oh, yeah, that's cool, but the special effects are a bit hokey, and that seems to be as far as it gets for them, and they don't seem to really understand, like, the multiple plot lines, man, and the complicated storylines that, the issues, man. It seems to go over some people.
Well, and that's the thing. I rewatch the series about every 5 years, and I just completed a rewatch like last fall, or actually no, this spring.
Right.
Yeah, it's to me that's why it's my favorite TV show of all time. It's got that depth that you just don't get in other shows. But
do you think I'm afraid to watch Breaking Bad because I don't want it to possibly be better than Babylon 5?
Don't worry, it's not. I mean,
I am watching Better Call Saul. I've actually literally,
which is better than Breaking Bad by a lot, by a wide margin.
I'm actually looking. I've got my laptop hooked up to the TV in my hotel room. I actually have Breaking Bad on the TV here. It's just paused. I'm up to season 4, episode 4. I've binge watched it over the last week or like 8 days or 9 days or so. And I've just been going through. It's a really good show. It's not, and that's not better than Babylon 5 either, but it is a good show.
Yeah, I mean, I always go back to my favorite, which is The Wire, but The Wire is a great example of a show that I believe it was all filmed on video, and so it's like it. They haven't really. There isn't a version that looks really great in HD or whatever. It stuck to the 4:3 aspect ratio, and the video quality isn't like superb or anything. So, but obviously, again, some of that really deep layered plot line and character development. But I never really got into Babylon 5 back in the day. It was on, but for whatever reason, it was a show that I only caught sporadically, and so I didn't really get the larger, complex storylines on it.
And Babylon 5 is a show that if they even remotely like it, is worth the second viewing, because there's so many things that were planted in the first season or two that pay off later that they seemed like nothing at the time, so you wouldn't even have remembered them. But when you see them the second time, and you're like,
right?
Because
unpopular opinion, right? You know how they had to cancel Crusade after 13 episodes because Straczynski was under pressure by the people who'd bought the show, basically, to put more sex and violence into the show and make it more sort of like character driven rather than story driven. And Straczynski's like, no, I'm not putting up with this in the first season. This is going to go for 5 seasons, and so they pulled it. But I personally would be, and Raven, and you might disagree with this, but what they did in Star Wars and the Clone Wars, there's like 7 seasons of Clone Wars. If they had remade Crusade but in animated version, like really good sort of 4K computer animation, but with all the same characters, I'd fucking watch that shit for sure, because I really wanted to see what that story was going to be, man. It looked like potential.
And that's not a bad idea too, because all the unlike the original show, I think all the actors, with the exception, all the actors for Crusade are still alive. And if it's animated, you don't have to worry about how they look, because the fact that they've aged because it's animated. It's not
right. You can get to do all the voiceovers for their own characters, which would be amazing. Yeah, but if you did that with B5 characters, you'd have to get a lot of new people to do the voices.
Well, see, that's one thing. I'm on a B5 group on Facebook, and every once in a while, including like earlier this week, there's always somebody who comes along and talks about, well, we should have a reboot, and the fixation is always on the graphics. Oh, well, better graphics. I'm like, that's gonna suck, because that's not what made the graphics are not what made Babylon 5 good or bad. You said it's that story and the interwoven story and all those that web of everything that connects. And the chemistry of the actors. You can't just and especially when they always do their dream casting of who they would use to replace the actors, and it's always like star people, like leading men, leading women, and I'm like, what made Babylon 5 good is because you had powerful character actors who played a role. They weren't there to be the pretty face for the most part. They were there because like Andrea Kansoulis and Peter Jurasik, they're character actors, and that's what made them great. And they were great at it, and that's what made those characters great. Sticking in famous people is not going to make the show better.
It depends on the famous people, I guess.
But the thing is, usually when you end up having a movie that's all like leading person, it doesn't go. There's no chemistry because everyone's trying to be the leading person, and that's it doesn't work.
So another thing that I've seen this week is a trailer for a new Matrix movie.
I saw like a still for that. I haven't seen it.
They had most of the original actors there in that movie, except Lawrence Fishburne.
Right. They were smart enough to realize it would be horrible.
Yeah, there is a person playing Morpheus, but it's not him. And I'm wondering if he just got too old to play the part, or if it was actually a decision like, nah.
I just never understood the attraction to that movie. I've seen it because my stepkids like it, and I've watched. They actually bought it for me for my birthday or Christmas at one point, and it just made me want to tear my eyes out with a spoon.
Okay.
Well, I thought the movie was mediocre. It was pretty cool special effects, and if you ever watch that thing in surround sound, it's freaking amazing for sure. You can't deny it, right? It's an experience. But I mostly don't like Keanu Reeves acting. I think he's very wooden. And I know he's supposed to be kind of that way in that character and everything, but it just doesn't really work for me. And I didn't really enjoy the movie. And I also say if Lawrence Fishburne's too old, well, then Keanu Reeves is definitely too old as well. I mean,
Who?
Keanu Reeves. He'd be, I mean, we all age at the same rate. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So
And then so is Hugo Weaving at that point, because Hugo Weaving thinks is as old as Lawrence Fishburne.
well, yeah, actually, Hugo Weaving be the oldest looking of the monks of the bunch, I'm sure. But I mean, I don't even know. I never really got into the thing that amused me about The Matrix is when it was in the cinemas. I mean, I had lots of friends who are generally like, "Wow, we could be in The Matrix, man," and I'm like, "Really?" But I mean, I had the same thing after that movie, They Live, came out, and people are going, "Man, I want to have some of those sunglasses so I can see if it really says anything, whatever." Because you really did come out and go, "Wow, it could be happening all around us, and we wouldn't even know," So yeah, sometimes movies do that to people, I guess, where you go, "Hang on, I never really thought of it from that angle. I could be a computer-generated me,"
Yeah, but see, Paul, I don't remember if you were in the here at the time when we talked about solipsism and all that, and I just said how because that's really what it is. It's the whole hard the problem of hard solipsism. Like we don't, and it's just like, yeah, whatever. It's just so tedious to me.
Why don't you tell me how you really feel about it, Joe?
Yeah, I don't even find it I don't even find it remotely interesting. Like, oh, what if we're like, yeah? I mean, that's the kind of thing. Maybe when you're stoned, you're probably like, whoa, man, it just blew my mind. But when you're sober, like, eh. It's like if somebody figures out how to get out of it, if we're in the Matrix and somebody figures out how to get out, then I'll change my opinion.
I enjoyed the movie when it came out, but I enjoy it less now because it's kind of an escapist thought. Like, what if, the horrible life that I'm living isn't real? And I just fixed a lot of the parts of my life that I didn't like. For people who aren't enjoying their lives as much, maybe it's a better movie.
Well, see, like I said, to me, if the whole thing of how it works is one thing is, I guess, if people are putting images into our brain and deceiving us, well, then those guys are dicks. But if this is my own brain generating this stuff, like, man, I wish I could come up with better stuff than this shit.
There were some scenes in the original Matrix that. When I look at them, they were not very well done with their graphics. The second two movies, it was the story that wasn't well done. But there was one scene in particular where Neo, the main character, jumps with an agent back in a subway, and they both hit the ceiling of the subway. And when they fall, he does a backflip to get out of the way of the train that's going to come, and the back flips like in slow motion. You can see him holding on to the cables that are on his harness. Like, his hands are right there. There's no way around it. Like, why would his hands be right there like that? He's holding onto cables that are flipping him, right? And it was so obvious to me at the time, Wow.
Hey, y'all remember last week we talked a little bit about the Dark Side of the Rainbow, where you can play Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon to the Wizard of Oz, and the music and the video link up in quite a lot of places. Well, have you all ever heard of the animated movie Animatrix, which is based on the Matrix, and it's like stories within sort of a series of short stories in that sort of universe?
Yes.
I swear to God, no kidding. If you really, 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 really want to indulge yourself, or me, put on Animatrix, turn off the sound for the movie, and put on Tool Enema. It's freaking amazing how much the music and the movie match up. It's
cool. See, something that Michael said reminded me of something that you remember. There was that movie several years ago, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and it got all these awards of the effects. I thought that looked like Drek. Like, so when the people are supposedly running up walls, it's very clearly someone on cables and their feet are just barely touching the walls they're running up. I'm like, this is not good. And that was my only criticism of what do you call it? Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings, is there's one spot in the film where they kind of do that same kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, don't do that. That shit was so cringy in Crouching Tiger. Don't repeat it, because it doesn't look realistic at all. It looks, it's painfully obvious that it's people on cables being lifted up and they're just barely touching the thing. They could have, and that was one of those things where, like, yeah, I generally prefer practical effects to CGI, but that's when we definitely needed CGI to make it look good.
Man, I think about movies like Logan's Run, which won a bunch of awards for its effects, but if you look at its effects now, it's just, oh, that's painful.
Well, see, that's where context matters. It's like you had to know what effects were like in 1974. Well, that's the thing. I mean, there are people who don't like Star Trek the original series strictly on the fact that the effects are massively outdated, and like, well, for 1964, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
Logan's Run, though, now there's a movie that's well overdue. I cannot believe it hasn't been remade in the past 15 years.
Well, I mean, they've talked about it, but apparently the original book, it wasn't age 30, it was age 21.
Oh wow!
Or was it 18? It was a much lower age, and I'm like, well, that kind of changes the whole nature of it, and it makes the whole scenario make less sense. I think the movie, the 30 makes a lot more sense.
So I know a little bit about this because I know William F. Nolan, who's the author of the book.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's. I only see him once a year. I haven't seen him in 2 years because of COVID, but he's at a Christmas party of a writers group that I go to. He's good friends with Jason Brock, who's a writer editor who I happen to know. And it's fun because William F. Nolan is like 95 or something like that. Yeah, they have been making a remake. Remake's been in production for a few years. He has nothing to do with it. In terms of the original age, there were various ages that had been applied to it. I believe it is 21 in the book or 25 in the book or something like that. I actually haven't read the book in a while, but Nolan is always talking about the ways in which the movie deviates from his book, the things he likes about it. But he's not very, I think, excited or happy about the remake that's being done right now. And I don't know exactly where it is, but they've been trying to do it for at least 3 years, and I think it's kind of stuck in production hell. But yeah, that is a movie that we will probably see the remake of in not too much time. Yeah, I think that's true. There's
Uh-oh. So I don't know what happened there. But yeah, I think if the point of 30 is that you're dying when you're young, I mean, what's the point of 21? I mean, to me, maybe it does say that in the book. I don't know, but that's a whole different flavor of, I don't know. You don't even really get a chance to really actually fully develop your brain by the time you're 21. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think that's why they changed it to 30. Yeah, 30 makes more sense, especially since, two things. One, a lot of people considered 30 old, and the whole thing of don't trust anyone over 30, right? That was that expression. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they would do with it. But yeah, I guess Vegas was talking about General Miley, or is it Millie, whatever how it's pronounced?
It's Millie, I believe.
Millie. So the idea. So
this is just a conservative hobby horse. It means nothing.
Well, I mean, the idea is that basically, well, I mean, if it's true what he did, that's actually was a good thing. Basically, that he actually back channeled to China and was like trying to keep things from escalating further because Trump was unbalanced and he was concerned that Trump was going to start an actual shooting war.
Yeah, same thing Khrushchev did with the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think it's a non-issue because every single time we've had these, conflicts with foreign powers, there have been back channels. There have been, high-ranking military commanders or presidents who are having secret conversations that are meant to be more private, more personal, and try and do a type of like diplomacy that isn't.
Yeah, but see, there's a big difference between presidents doing it, that's part of their job, or a military leader doing it at the behest of a president. It's very different if the military leader is going around the president because the president can't be trusted.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly differences to that. Absolutely. I just don't know that it's something that's vastly different than anything that's ever happened before.
Well,
I mean, we had this kind of stuff happen where, people were talking to Iran during the Iran-Contra situation.
Yeah. Well, right, but again, that was at the behest of the top guy, right?
Of Reagan.
The only other time I'm aware of that they did this was during Nixon's term, because apparently Nixon would have these dissociative moments, and they were like worried that he was going to try to nuke somebody, and they basically bypassed. Like basically, it was like they do not listen to whatever the boss says between the hours of 9 and it's 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. because he's off his nut, and we have to make sure we don't blow up the world. So, and that's actually trouble. I mean, I'm glad that they did it in both cases, because in both cases it could potentially have prevented a war. But it's a scary notion that they had to. So,
right. Yeah, I mean, I think that much more of this kind of stuff happens than is always made public. There's all kinds. Like I'm thinking about, like, there were times when people in Congress were talking to leaders, in past administrations, and it's sort of a political fodder thing. I don't know. I guess I'm just not. I don't have any feathers ruffled about it.
Well, again, even there, like there's even a difference between someone in Congress doing it versus, again, someone in the military, because remember, the military person is subordinate to the president as opposed to members of Congress who are not. So I'm curious about. I'm not sure. So are you saying, Vegas, that the conservatives are mad at him because they think he caused the delay of the withdrawal from Afghanistan? Which, why would they be upset about that? Because they didn't want to leave at all.
Right.
So I'm unclear.
Because Joe Biden now gets credit for something in a way that they don't want to give him credit for.
Right, but see, they're mad at him that he did it, though. So to them, it's not credit, is it?
Well, maybe they're not mad that he did it, but because it's him, the way that he did it.
Yeah. They engage in doublethink, full stop. Like when they had the American Rescue Plan, none of them voted for it whatsoever. And then after it was passed, all of them went to their constituencies and told their people how to sign up to, get the benefits from it, and seemed to take the credit for it, even though literally none of them voted for it. And it's, that's what they do. And it's the opposite way around with this. They basically talk out of both sides of their face.
Well, they did the same thing, if you remember, when Obama was president, regarding Libya. So I remember John McCain was on all the shows on a Friday saying, it was on a Thursday, saying that Obama needed to intercede in Libya and do something about it, and we weren't, and he's showing a lack of leadership, blah, 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 blah. And then Friday we start dropping bombs in Libya. Then Sunday he's on the show. It's like, I can't believe he's dropping bombs in Libya. It's like, dude, you literally asked for this 3 days ago, and he did it the next day, and now you're mad. I don't know who Kyle Kalinske is.
Kyle Kalinske is Secular Talk on YouTube.
Yeah, he's generally, I think, pretty fair. I don't know. He's, as much as you can expect sort of fairness and level-headed from YouTube political commentators. I think Kyle Kalinske is pretty good.
Back in 2016, I agreed. I was embarrassed to say that I agreed with like 95% of what Kyle Kalinske was saying around about 2015, 2016. But nowadays, that's more like 50-50, which I'm much more comfortable with. So it's kind of embarrassing when you agree with someone too much,
Well, it depends on why you agree with them. I mean, if you actually...
Well, he was actually right as far as I was concerned. He was right about a lot of stuff. I mean, he was where I was at the time. But right. I'm not sure if I've stayed someplace and he's moved on, or if I've moved on and he's someplace, or we both just gone that way. But I'm not so sure,
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't mind agreeing with somebody a lot as long as I've used the tools of skepticism to evaluate what they've said, as opposed to being tribal and just joining punching the ticket because the feeder said the right word.
Right.
But and then it was quiet.
Yeah, actually, I think I'm going to jump off. I have other things that I'm half concentrating on that I should be doing. But it's been enjoyable to come back.
Thanks for hanging out again, Jack.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Jack.
So have a good night, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
And I'm going to be dropping off early tonight because I was driven. I did about 10 hours of driving in the last 2 days, and I'm pretty knackered. I almost didn't come on at all tonight, but
well, that's cool. It's a good place to stop the show in, because I try to keep it around 3 hours for the live show. So this sounds like a good place. So let's say thank you to the audience for hanging in there, and nobody in the audience was particularly aggressive or nasty or unpleasant. So kudos, thanks very much, guys. And until next time, may all your ups and downs be ups. Wave goodbye, people.